Hey there, tonight we're diving into the sumptuous world of an ancient Roman feast, where beneath the seductive aroma of spiced wine and roasted meats lies the surprising truth. The most exclusive diners were often reclining on couches, not chairs. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. If you happen to stumble upon a Roman feast, you'd be in for a spectacle that could rival the most lavish Hollywood galas, minus the red carpet, but with just as much drama. Ancient Rome didn't just eat to live, they lived to eat, and their dining rooms were testament to that. Welcome to the triclinium, the VIP lounge of ancient Roman society, where everything from the architecture to the seating plan was a reflection of who you were, or more importantly, who you weren't. Let's break down the pecking order, shall we? Roman society was like a very exclusive club, and your spot on the social ladder determined how close you sat to the culinary action. Picture the triclinium like a three-sided couch, with the open side facing the entrance. The host, the real big cheese, well, they'd sit at the top left corner of the U-shape, the locus consularis, literally, the consul's place. This seat was the ancient equivalent of today's Instagram influencer front row. Your proximity to this spot was a direct indicator of your social clout. If you were seated near the host, congratulations, you were somebody. If you were at the far end, well, better luck next feast. Now, if you think the seating arrangement was all about comfort, think again. Reclining on couches was a status symbol. It wasn't just about lounging. It was about lounging with purpose. It showcased leisure, a luxury only the elite could afford. But don't let the laid-back pose fool you. This was more about power dynamics than relaxation. Imagine trying to balance a goblet of wine while making small talk about gladiator matches and grain prices. It's no wonder the Romans needed slaves to clean up after them. Speaking of which, your seat at the table was often determined by your wealth, social standing, and political alliances. Invitations were gold. No papyrus RSVP, no entry. The invite list was a who's who of Roman society, and getting on it was like scoring a ticket to the Met Gala, except with more togas and fewer selfies. If you weren't born into it, you better have some serious connections, or have done something spectacularly noteworthy to earn your place. The invitation process was an art form with its own rules and rituals. Hosts sent out their invitations on wax tablets, and the guest list was a delicate balance of power and politics. If you were a senator or a wealthy merchant, you had a good shot at an invite. If you were a plebeian, however, you were more likely to provide the entertainment than partake in it. And let's not forget the lengths people would go to for an invite. Stories tell of individuals bribing slaves for information or even crashing feasts, hoping to blend in with the crowd. It was a game of social chess, and only the shrewdest players got to eat the proverbial cake. The architecture of the dining rooms themselves was a reflection of all this social maneuvering. The triclinium was not just a room, it was a stage. The layout was designed to showcase the host's wealth and taste. Frescoes adorned the walls, depicting scenes of mythology and daily life, a constant reminder of Rome's greatness. The more opulent the decor, the more important the host. These spaces were meticulously planned for acoustics too, ensuring that guests could hear every cutting remark and compliment tossed across the room. It was all about seeing and being seen, hearing and being heard. So why did this all matter? In ancient Rome, dinner wasn't just about food. It was about networks, alliances, and subtle displays of dominance. It was where political deals were brokered, social ties were strengthened, and reputations were made or broken. The feast was a microcosm of Roman society itself, opulent, strategic, and rife with intrigue. Next time you're sitting down to dinner, just be glad you don't have to elbow your way to the best seat, unless, of course, you're dining with your in-laws. Now that we've navigated the social labyrinth of the Roman dining room, let's get to the heart of the matter, the menu. Contrary to popular belief, Roman feasts were not just endless buffets of grapes, cheese, and wine, despite what those seductive frescoes might suggest. Sure, grapes were there, but they were more like the opening act than the headliner, the real showstopper, a dizzying array of dishes that would make a modern-day foodie's head spin. First off, let's debunk the grape and wine myth. While wine was as ubiquitous as water, and sometimes safer to drink, the Romans weren't just swigging from goblets all day. Wine was often diluted with water, a habit the Greeks considered a sign of civility, and mixed with spices or honey to create a variety of flavors. Imagine a time when your wine choice was less about vintage and more about which exotic spice blend you preferred. Mulsum, a popular Roman drink, was honeyed wine and made the whole experience a bit sweeter, literally. Now, let's talk entrees. A Roman feast was a culinary journey, one that took guests from the familiar to the exotic. It wasn't all about opulence. Sometimes it was about shark value. The menu could include dormice, tiny rodents that were considered a delicacy. They were stuffed with pork, mixed with spices, and served as appetizers. Yes, you heard that right, stuffed dormice. If you think kale is a controversial starter today, try serving those at your next dinner party. The Romans had a saying, ab ovo usque ad mala, meaning from the egg to the apples, which was the equivalent of our soup to nuts. Eggs were often the starting point of a meal, signaling the beginning of the feast. But don't just picture scrambled eggs. Think more along the lines of peacock eggs, boiled and seasoned. A bit showy, absolutely. But that was the point. The more extravagant, the better. Main courses were where the Romans really flexed their culinary muscles. Exotic meats like flamingo tongues were considered the height of indulgence. One might say, what's the big deal about a bird tongue? Well, in ancient Rome, it was all about rarity and the logistics of getting these delicacies onto your plate. Flamingos, after all, were not exactly backyard birds. And let's not forget the infamous garum, a fermented fish sauce that was poured over everything. It was the Roman equivalent of ketchup, though perhaps a bit more pungent. Garum was so popular that Pliny the Elder noted it was the most exquisite of all condiments. Yet, the most spectacular part of a Roman feast was often the elaborate centerpiece. Hosts would go to absurd lengths to impress their guests, creating dishes that were as much about spectacle as they were about flavor. The piece de resistance might be a roasted boar, sewn back together to appear whole, only to reveal a surprise inside, stuffed birds or sausages tumbling out when cut open. This dish was known as the Trojan boar, a nod to Homer's Iliad, and a culinary metaphor for deception. Talk about dinner theater. But why such extravagance? The Roman Empire's vast trade networks made it possible to source ingredients from the far reaches of their world, Spain, North Africa, and even India. Black pepper, an imported luxury, was worth its weight in gold, literally. A pound of pepper could cost as much as a slave, making it a status symbol in its own right. The empire's robust infrastructure enabled a flow of goods that today we'd call globalization 1.0, long before the term was coined. The economic factors behind this culinary opulence were as layered as a Roman lasagna. Wealthy Romans were not just flaunting their riches, they were investing in social capital. Hosting a grand feast was like throwing a modern-day gala, a chance to network, show off, and climb the social ladder. The cost of these banquets could be astronomical. Consider this. A single feast could cost as much as a small villa, but to the host, it was an investment in reputation and influence. These feasts weren't just about food. They were about power, politics, and prestige. A successful banquet could cement alliances, win political favor, or even sway public opinion. In a society where appearances were everything, the ability to host a memorable feast was a crucial skill, akin to public speaking or military prowess. It was a world where your dining room was your stage, and every guest was a player in the drama of Roman life. As we dig deeper into the realities of Roman cuisine, it's clear that their dining habits were a reflection of the empire itself. Vast, diverse, and not without a touch of the theatrical. So next time you sip on a glass of wine or tuck into a plate of something exotic, remember that the Romans were doing it first, and with considerably more flair. And as for those grapes, well, they were just one part of a much more complex and fascinating menu. Stay tuned, because the feast is far from over. Now, as the Roman feast continues, imagine the clatter of cutlery being drowned out by the rhythmic beat of a tambourine. Welcome to the entertainment section, where the Romans took their motto of bread and circuses quite literally. And let's face it, after a feast that included dormice and flamingo tongues, they needed something to keep the guests from slipping into a food coma. The entertainment at these banquets was as varied as the menu, ranging from music and poetry recitals to the blood-pumping thrill of gladiatorial combat. Yes, you heard right. Some hosts thought nothing of turning their dining room into a mini-coliseum. Forget Netflix. This was the ultimate live streaming experience. Before we dive into the gory details, let's start with the more genteel forms of amusement. Music was the background score of a Roman feast, and musicians, often slaves or impoverished freemen, played everything from the lyre to the aulos, an ancient double-reed instrument that was the ancestor of the arbo. Picture a Roman Kenny G, serenading the crowd with soulful tunes, setting the mood for the evening's intrigue. And if music wasn't your thing, how about some poetry? A skilled poet could command attention and admiration, weaving words as expertly as a chef prepared dishes. The poet Martial, for example, was known for his biting epigrams that often poked fun at the very hosts who hired him. Talk about a risky gig, but let's not forget the dramatic performances. Actors would reenact scenes from plays, often with exaggerated gestures and masks that made modern-day soap operas look like documentaries. These performances provided a welcome distraction for guests, who could momentarily escape the political games of Roman society and lose themselves in a world of myth and legend. It was here, amid the laughter and applause, that the seeds of political alliances were often sown. Now, about those gladiatorial spectacles. While not every feast featured combatants fighting to the death, thankfully for the upholstery, there were occasions when a host, eager to impress or cement a political alliance, would arrange for gladiators to battle it out for the entertainment of their guests. These matches were the ancient equivalent of pay-per-view boxing, except the stakes were a tad higher. Gladiators were typically slaves or prisoners of war, trained in special schools to fight for the amusement of the elite. Their presence at a feast was a stark reminder of Rome's power dynamics, where life and death were often decided by the whims of the wealthy. The role of entertainers and servants in these feasts was a complex dance of power and subservience. Musicians and actors, though often seen as little more than living decorations, could wield a subtle influence. A well-timed song or a sharp-witted line could sway a conversation or shift the mood of the room, turning the tide of political negotiations. Meanwhile, the servants were the unsung heroes of these events, ensuring that goblets were always full and plates never empty. These men and women operated like a well-oiled machine, maneuvering through the throng with practiced precision. A slip-up could mean more than just a spilled drink. It could mean a lost alliance or an insult taken to heart. And speaking of alliances, let's not underestimate the political machinations that unfolded over those lavish spreads. These feasts were as much about power plays as they were about pleasure. Picture a senator leaning over a plate of peacock eggs, whispering sweet nothings, or perhaps strategic nothings, into the ear of a potential ally. Deals were struck, favors exchanged, and enemies subtly undermined, all under the guise of conviviality. In a world where power was the ultimate currency, every gesture, every word was a negotiation. Hosts wielded their invitations like chess pieces, strategically seeding guests to foster alliances or sow discord. A senator on the rise might find himself seated next to a general with influence, while a rival might be placed at the far end of the couch, out of the loop and out of sight. These social gatherings were a microcosm of Roman politics, where the stakes were as high as the ceilings of the triclinia. The political landscape of ancient Rome was as treacherous as it was captivating. With the Republic giving way to the Empire, the balance of power shifted constantly, and a single feast could alter the course of history. The ability to host a successful banquet was not just about culinary prowess. It was about navigating the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined Roman society. In this world, a feast was a stage, and every guest was an actor in the grand drama of Roman life. In examining the entertainment of Roman feasts, we see that these events were more than just opportunities for indulgence. They were arenas for the exercise of power, where the line between pleasure and politics blurred. The music, the performances, the very layout of the dining room, all were tools in the hands of astute hosts, used to manipulate, charm, and influence. So the next time you find yourself at a dinner party with a bit too much drama, remember, the Romans did it first, and with considerably higher stakes. As we leave the cacophony of the Roman feast behind, we must prepare for the next course in our journey through ancient Rome. Stay tuned, because the drama is far from over. As we navigate the labyrinth of Roman feasting, Let's pull back the silk curtains and peek into the bustling chaos behind the scenes. Ever wonder what it took to pull off one of these epic banquets? Spoiler alert, it wasn't all wine and roses. Hosting a Roman feast was the ancient equivalent of launching a Broadway show, complete with rehearsals, a hefty budget, and an exhausted crew. First things first, let's talk money. A lavish Roman feast could cost a small fortune, literally. The price tag for one of these shindigs could rival the cost of a modest villa. We're talking about thousands of sesterces. For context, a legionary soldier might earn around 900 sesterces a year. So, imagine blowing your entire annual salary on a single night. That's what some hosts did, all in the name of social climbing and political maneuvering. But where did all that money go, you ask? Well, let's start with the food. Procuring exotic ingredients was no small feat. Flamingo tongues and dormice didn't just appear on your doorstep like a Roman Uber Eats. These delicacies were sourced from the far corners of the empire, requiring a complex supply chain worthy of a logistics PhD. Consider black pepper. This tiny spice was worth its weight in gold because it traveled thousands of miles from India to reach Roman tables. The journey alone could take months, involving perilous seas and treacherous mountain passes. Then there was the labor. A grand feast required an army of servants working tirelessly behind the scenes. These individuals were the unsung heroes of the Roman dining room, juggling tasks with the precision of a Cirque du Soleil performer. From the cooks sweating over heart fires to the slaves refilling goblets and clearing plates, these workers turned the chaos into a seamless experience for the guests. And let's not forget the entertainers, musicians, poets, and even gladiators, all adding to the spectacle, all needing their share of the host's purse. The sheer logistics of managing such an event could give a modern wedding planner night terrors. Pliny the Younger, in one of his famous letters, described how a host might prepare for a feast, detailing the careful planning and coordination required. No one who has not seen it, he wrote, can imagine the bustle and confusion which such an event demands. And he wasn't exaggerating. Each course of the meal needed to be timed perfectly, with servants darting in and out like a synchronized swim team, ensuring the evening flowed smoothly. But let's not romanticize the sweat and toil too much. The stark reality was this. For every guest reclining on a cushioned couch, there were dozens of workers toiling away, often in harsh conditions. The disparity between the opulence enjoyed by the elite and the laborious grind of the lower classes was as wide as the Tiber. While the wealthy sipped diluted wine and nibbled on peacock eggs, the servants were lucky to receive leftovers, if anything at all. The economic impact on the host was a double-edged sword. Sure, a successful feast could bolster one's social standing and political influence, but it could also cripple a host financially. The pressure to outdo one's peers led to an arms race of extravagance, with hosts going to extreme lengths to impress. It was the ultimate high-stakes poker game, and folding was not an option. Let's inject some perspective here. The Romans were a society obsessed with appearances and status, a world where public image was everything. Imagine the pressure to host a feast that not only delighted but dazzled. It was a balancing act of epic proportions, with one foot in opulence and the other precariously close to ruin. The host's reputation was as much on the line as the financial investment, making each feast a gamble of social capital. Quintilian, the famed Roman educator, once remarked, "A good host ensures his guests leave with full bellies and empty pockets." The irony wasn't lost on the Romans, who were acutely aware of the socio-economic tightrope they walked. The elite feasted on illusions of grandeur, while the reality for most was a life of hard work with few rewards. It was a society where the glittering facade often masked the grueling labor that sustained it. In pulling back the curtain on the practical realities of Roman feasting, we're left with a complex tapestry of ambition, excess, and inequality. The opulence of these banquets, while captivating, was built on the backs of those who labored in obscurity. It's a reminder that history, much like dinner theater, is full of drama both on and off the stage. The Roman feast was a microcosm of the empire itself, a world of stark contrasts and complex dynamics. As we digest this insight, let's leave room for the next course in our exploration of ancient Rome, where the drama only intensifies. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. So, as we digest the complexities of Roman feasting, let's chew on the legacy these extravagant gatherings left behind. Roman feasts weren't just about culinary bravado. They were cultural powerhouses that echoed through the ages, setting the stage for our modern dining and social rituals. If you've ever wondered why dinner parties are the preferred battleground for family feuds, or why the hostess with the mostess is still a coveted title, you have the Romans to thank, or blame, depending on how you view it. First off, let's dispel the notion that Roman feasts were all about indulgence. Yes, they were opulent, excessive, and sometimes downright ludicrous. Hello, flamingo tongues, but they also served a deeper purpose. These gatherings were a reflection of Roman values, community, status, and the art of persuasion. The Romans understood that breaking bread was more than just eating. It was about connecting, negotiating, and occasionally showing off just how far you go to impress your peers. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and the echoes of those banquets can still be heard in our dining rooms. Think about the modern dinner party. We obsess over seating arrangements, the right wine pairings, and whether the playlist will hit just the right note between hip and laid back. Sound familiar? That's because, deep down, we're channeling our inner Roman hosts, who knew that a successful feast could make or break social standing. The key difference: our stakes are usually limited to a few bruised egos and maybe a spilled drink, not political alliances that could decide the fate of an empire. Take Thanksgiving, for example. It's more than just turkey and stuffing. It's a ritual where family dynamics play out like a reboot of Game of Thrones. The seeding plan alone can be a diplomatic minefield. And while flamingo tongues aren't on the menu, there's always that one dish, green bean casserole, anyone. That divides the table. These modern meal-centric gatherings owe more to Roman feasts than we might like to admit. They're stages for familial politics, complete with the drama, the alliances, and yes, the occasional betrayal over the last slice of pie. And let's not overlook the influence of Roman dining on the very architecture of our social eating spaces. The triclinium, with its couches and strategic seating, was the precursor to our modern dining room setups, where the head of the table still reigns supreme. The legacy of Roman feasts lives on in how we design our spaces to facilitate conversation and connection, albeit with fewer couches and more chairs. But the essence remains: the dining room as a theater where every guest has a role to play. Now, let's talk about the culinary impact. While we're not stuffing dormice or fermenting fish sauce in our kitchens, thankfully, Roman culinary innovation laid the groundwork for the diverse flavors we enjoy today. Consider the global spice trade. Roman demand for exotic spices like black pepper helped establish long-distance trade routes that would evolve and expand over the centuries, turning the spice trade into a cornerstone of global commerce. The Romans were the original foodies, setting the stage for the culinary globalization we experience today. Yet, it's crucial to remember that beneath the glamour of Roman feasts lay a stark reality. The grandiosity was supported by a system rife with inequality, where the comforts of a few were built on the labor of many. This duality, a lavish facade masking a harsh truth, is a recurring theme in history, one that cautions us to look beyond the surface and question the structures that sustain our pleasures. The Romans, in their quest for perfection, remind us that every feast has its cost, and not just incestuses. So, what would a Roman think of our modern dinner parties? They'd probably be amused by our penchant for simplicity, our desire to be seen as humble hosts while still subtly showcasing our culinary prowess. They might raise an eyebrow at our reliance on takeout and our obsession with dietary restrictions. Gluten-free dormice, anyone. They'd recognize the familiar dance of social maneuvering and the quest for status that underpins it all. The Romans understood that a meal was never just a meal. It was an opportunity to influence, to connect, and sometimes to conquer. In reflecting on the legacy of Roman feasts, we're reminded that while the food and the settings may change, the essence of dining as a social ritual endures. It's a testament to the power of shared experiences, the universal language of food, and the timeless dance of human interaction. As we sip our wine, perhaps not as diluted as the Romans preferred, and gather around our tables, we step into a tradition that spans centuries, connecting us to a past that is both distant and surprisingly familiar. In the end, the Romans taught us that a feast is more than just a meal. It's a celebration of life, a reflection of society, and a stage for the drama of human interaction. So next time you find yourself hosting or attending a dinner party, remember that you're part of a grand tradition, one that stretches back to the triclinia of ancient Rome. And as you navigate the social intricacies of your own gatherings, take a moment to raise a glass to the Romans, who understood the art of the feast better than anyone. Cheers to that. Before anyone grumbled about McDonald's drive-through lines, ancient Romans were already munching on fast food, albeit without the convenience of a chariot lane. Picture the bustling streets of Rome around 100 AD, a kaleidoscope of togas and tunics, with vendors hawking everything from figs to fermented fish sauce. And yes, the aroma is as pungent as it sounds. This wasn't just the heart of an empire, it was the epicenter of culinary curiosity and quick bites. Welcome to the world of Parpany and Thermopolia, the original fast food joints of the Eternal City. These establishments were the lifeblood of the average Roman citizen, much like coffee shops for the modern millennial. Parpany were your one-stop shops for a drink and a snack, the ancient version of a pub, while Thermopolia were more like street-side food stalls where you could grab a quick meal. You can almost hear the cacophony of vendors shouting over each other, each promising the best pulse, a type of porridge made from emmer wheat, or the freshest garum, that infamous fermented fish sauce that made Roman noses twitch and taste buds tingle. Garum was to Romans what ketchup is to Americans, a staple, albeit one that might clear a room. Let's talk economics, because Romans were nothing if not practical. A bowl of pulse at a Thermopolium might cost you a single as the smallest Roman coin, which could buy you a few loaves of bread, depending on the grain market's mood. Garum, however, was a bit pricier, ranging from a few sestertii for the mass-produced stuff to a small fortune for the premium artisanal sauce. Think of it as the difference between generic ketchup and the organic, small-batch kind that makes your wallet cry. Why did these quick bites matter? Well, in a city where most people lived in cramped, fire-prone insulae or apartment buildings, cooking at home wasn't just inconvenient, it was sometimes prohibited. Fire hazards were the ancient version of a nosy landlord, and popping down to the local Parpana or Thermopolium was a safer, tastier alternative. These places were the social hubs of Roman life, where the plebs mingled with freedmen, soldiers, and the occasional senator slumming it for a taste of the common life. Now, you might think fast food is a modern invention, a byproduct of our need for speed and convenience. But the Romans had already cracked that code centuries ago. Their fast food culture offered a surprising glimpse into their social dynamics and economic stratification. These eateries were more than just a place to grab a bite. They were the Twitter feeds of ancient Rome, buzzing with gossip, political intrigue, and the occasional fistfight over a spilled cup of mulsum, a sweetened wine beloved by many. What's fascinating is how little has changed. Today, fast food is often criticized for being unhealthy, yet it's a staple for many due to its affordability and convenience. Similarly, Roman snacks weren't winning any health awards. Pulse was carb-heavy, and garum, well, let's just say that a fishy sauce left fermenting under the hot Mediterranean sun wasn't exactly a dietitian's dream. But these quick bites were accessible, and in a society where the average man's diet was dictated by his coin purse, they were indispensable. So, raise your imaginary goblet of watered-down wine to the Parpany and Thermopolia, the unsung heroes of Roman culinary culture. They were the greasy spoons of their day, serving up sustenance with a side of social commentary long before anyone thought to slap a golden arch over the doorway. And as you stroll past these ancient snack shacks in your mind's eye, remember that while empires rise and fall, the need for a quick, satisfying bite remains eternal. And speaking of goblets, let's dive into what ancient Romans were actually dunking into those cups and shoving onto their plates. It wasn't all pulse and garum, though those were certainly mainstays. The Roman snack scene was an intricate dance of ingredients, each with its own story of origin, trade route, and economic implication. Imagine olives, those tiny green and black gems, which were a staple in Roman diets. These weren't just for tossing into salads. Romans pressed them for oil, a key ingredient that lubricated both their cuisine and their economy. Olive oil was the Roman version of liquid gold, and it poured in from all corners of the empire, from sunny Tunisia to the rocky hills of Hispania. In fact, Rome imported so much olive oil that Monte Testaccio, hill made of discarded oil amphorae, eventually grew to about 35 meters high. Now, that's what I call a monumental waste problem. But waste or not, this oil was indispensable. It wasn't just for cooking. It lit their lamps and even doubled as a kind of ancient moisturizer. Now, if you're thinking the Romans were simply slathering their bread with olive oil and calling it a day, think again. Let's talk about honey, nature's candy, and another Roman favorite. Unlike today, where it's a sweetener du jour for hipster coffee shops, back then it was your go-to sugar substitute, as sugar itself hadn't yet made it onto the European scene. Honey came from hives as far-flung as Egypt and parts of the Near East, imported with as much effort as enthusiasm. It was drizzled over figs, mixed in with wine, and even used in medicinal concoctions. A sweet tooth, it seems, transcends time. The logistics of getting these ingredients to the Roman market were nothing short of a Herculean task. Picture vast networks of roads and sea routes that bridged continents. Each amphora of oil or jar of honey a player in a vast economic orchestra. And here's where things get interesting. Taxes. Yes, the Romans, like any good government, knew how to collect their dues. Import taxes on luxury items were a gold mine. These levies not only lined the imperial coffers, but also dictated what was affordable to whom, reinforcing the social strata with each transaction. And speaking of luxuries, the Romans had a taste for the exotic that would make even the most adventurous foodie blush. Spices like pepper and cinnamon traveled thousands of miles from India, carried along a spice route that was the Silk Road's more flavorful sibling. These spices were the ancient equivalent of today's truffle oil, eye-wateringly expensive, but irresistibly trendy. And just like modern culinary fads, the allure was in the rarity and the status it conferred. Spices were stored in tiny containers, doled out sparingly, and discussed with the kind of reverence we reserve for vintage wines. But let's not romanticize too much. The reality of the spice trade was far grittier than the glamorous tales of adventure might suggest. Imagine long and perilous journeys, goods transported by camel caravan across deserts, then by ship over treacherous seas. Each step of the journey added cost and risk, and the final price tag reflected every drop of sweat and ounce of danger. Yet the Romans couldn't get enough. Their obsession with the exotic mirrors our own love affair with imported luxuries. After all, nothing says, "I've made it," like sprinkling a little pepper on your pulse. So, what does this all tell us? The Roman market was a complex beast, an intricate web of supply and demand that stretched across the empire. It wasn't just about food. It was a microcosm of Roman society itself, where every olive and every grain of pepper was a piece of a larger puzzle. And as we savor these historical tidbits, it's clear that while the menu has changed over the millennia, the hunger for flavor, status, and convenience remains timeless. In the next course of our Roman culinary journey, we'll continue to explore how these ancient snacks fed more than just bodies. They fueled economies and empires, each bite a reflection of the world it came from. Stay tuned, because we've only just started peeling back the layers of Rome's rich, and occasionally fishy, culinary tapestry. So, as we chew on the idea of Rome's snack scene being more than just a casual nibble, let's dig into how these bites were woven into the very fabric of Roman life, socially, economically, and culturally. The Romans didn't just eat, they dined with purpose, whether they were plebeians grabbing a quick pulse from a thermopolium, or nobles indulging in multi-course banquets that would make a modern buffet look like a kiddie meal. First, let's tackle the myth of the Roman feast. You know, the one where toga-clad elites recline on couches, being hand-fed grapes by servants. It's tempting to imagine every Roman meal was a bacchanalian affair, but the reality was a bit more pedestrian. Sure, the elites had their moments of excessive indulgence. Take Trimalchio, the fictional freedman from Petronius's Satyricon, who threw a banquet so over the top it makes Las Vegas seem tasteful. But for most Romans, daily dining was less about decadence and more about making do. Your average Roman diet was heavy on grains. Emma wheat and barley were the stars of the show. Meat was a luxury, not a staple, often reserved for special occasions. Even then, it was more likely to be pork or chicken than the exotic peacock or flamingo tongues you might have read about. Fish, however, was more common, particularly in coastal regions. Salted fish, anyone. It was the ancient version of canned tuna. To really get to the meat of Roman snacking culture, consider the social status attached to food. For the elite, a banquet wasn't just a meal, it was a power play. Cicero, the Roman statesman, once quipped, Ut sementum feceris ida meets, as you sow, so shall you reap. In other words, throw a good banquet and reap the social rewards. These events were networking opportunities, entrenching one's status and influence. The menu was a statement, with exotic ingredients flaunted as badges of wealth and power. In contrast, street meals were the great equalizers of Roman society. At the local parpina, a senator might find himself elbow to elbow with a plebeian, both slurping down bowls of pulse. This mingling wasn't always harmonious, mind you. Fights over food were as common as the meals themselves, a testament to the passion Romans had for their grub. And let's not forget the role of wine, which flowed as freely as the gossip. Mulsum, a blend of wine and honey, was the drink du jour, blurring social lines with every cup. Ancient texts offer us a glimpse into this culinary world. Pliny the Elder, in Naturalis Historia, mentions the widespread use of garum, noting its ability to enhance even the simplest fare. No other liquid except unguents has begun to be more highly valued, he writes, highlighting its significance in both kitchen and commerce. Meanwhile, Caro the Elder's De Agricultura provides recipes that seem almost mundane by comparison, emphasizing the everyday simplicity of Roman meals. But what about indulgence for the common folk? Well, Romans were nothing if not resourceful. Fruits like figs and dates were popular sweet treats, often dried for preservation. Nuts, too, were a favorite snack. Almonds and walnuts were staple nibbles, providing a nutritious punch in compact form. These weren't just snacks. They were survival tactics in a world where food scarcity was a constant threat. The cultural significance of snacking in Rome extended beyond mere survival. It was about identity and community. Sharing a meal was an act of social bonding, a ritual that transcended class barriers. Even the humblest street meal was a chance to connect, to share stories and news. It's something we can relate to today, food as a medium for human interaction, breaking down barriers with each bite. Economically, the snack trade was a vital cog in the Roman machine. Vendors and shopkeepers were the lifeblood of the city's economy, their stalls humming with activity. They were the ancient equivalents of today's food trucks, offering convenience and novelty in equal measure. The bustling markets were a testament to Rome's economic ingenuity, a melting pot of goods and cultures that fueled the empire's insatiable appetite. Now, let's pause to savor the irony. While we often romanticize the grandeur of Roman banquets, it's the street meals that tell the real story of the empire. They were a microcosm of Roman society, reflecting its complexities, its hierarchies, and its quirks. The snacks weren't just about filling stomachs. They filled social and economic gaps, providing a taste of equality in an otherwise stratified world. As we continue to explore the Roman culinary landscape, it's clear that the humble snack was much more than meets the eye. It was a reflection of Rome itself, dynamic, diverse, and deliciously complex. And much like the empire, it reminds us that sometimes the simplest things hold the most profound significance. So, raise your imaginary goblet once more, because our journey into the flavors of ancient Rome is far from over. There's still much to chew on, and I promise the next course will be just as savory. As we continue our culinary journey, let's pivot from savory bites to the unappetizing truths of ancient Roman food safety, or lack thereof. This isn't your grandma's recipe card collection. It's a grimy, gritty peek into the perilous world of Roman street food. While we romanticize those bustling markets, they weren't exactly the pinnacle of sanitation. If you think today's health inspectors have it tough, try enforcing regulations in a city where cleanliness was more of a suggestion than a rule. First, let's address the elephant, or perhaps the rat, in the room: preservation. Before refrigeration, keeping food fresh was a Herculean task. Romans relied on a mix of salting, smoking, and drying to eke out a few more days of edibility. But these methods were far from foolproof. In a climate as hot and humid as Rome's, spoilage was not just a risk, it was practically an inevitability. If you've ever left leftovers out for too long, imagine that times 10, with a side of Mediterranean heat. And then there's the infamous garum, that beloved fish sauce we discussed earlier. Made by fermenting fish innards mixed with salt, it was the Roman answer to the question nobody asked. What if ketchup could go bad? The process involved leaving vats of this concoction to stew under the sun, producing a smell that could probably be bottled as a weapon. It's no wonder the Roman poet Martial quipped that garum could make a corpse revivable, a sick man well. But let's not just pick on garum. The entire Roman food chain was plagued by hazards. Lead pipes, for example, were all the rage for distributing water, even if it meant a side of lead poisoning with every sip. And while the wealthy could afford imported delicacies, the common folk often dined on whatever was available, which, let's face it, wasn't always fresh. Meat was particularly tricky. Without proper storage, it had a shelf life shorter than a Roman emperor's reign. Archaeological digs have unearthed the remains of amphorae filled with grain, often riddled with weevil holes. These weren't decorative polka darts. They were the remnants of an all-you-can-eat buffet for pests. Grain was a dietary staple, so infestations could spell disaster. Inscriptions and records reveal that Romans tried to combat these issues with various remedies, from herbs to smoke. Think of it as the ancient version of bug spray. Health hazards lurked in every corner of the Roman market, with foodborne illnesses as common as sandals in the Forum. In fact, Pliny the Elder, a bit of a buzzkill with his warnings, noted that some mushrooms were better left uneaten unless you fancied an impromptu trip to the afterlife. And let's not forget the wine. While it flowed like water, it was often cut with substances like seawater or lead to enhance its flavor and shelf life, because nothing says refreshing like a side of heavy metal. Despite these dangers, Roman authorities did attempt some regulation, albeit inconsistently. They implemented laws against fraudulent practices, akin to today's truth in advertising standards, though enforcement was about as reliable as a wooden calendar. The 12 Tables, Rome's oldest surviving set of laws, had strict rules about selling spoiled goods. Yet, as with many things in history, the gap between law and practice was as wide as the Tiber River. Historians have found references to food inspectors, though their effectiveness was questionable. More often than not, the onus was on the buyer to beware. This caveat emptor approach meant that consumers had to rely on their senses and a bit of luck to avoid a bad batch. Imagine shopping for groceries with all the certainty of playing Russian roulette. On the brighter side, the Romans were nothing if not resilient. Their love for novelty and taste often outweighed their fear of food poisoning. This led to culinary innovations that would make a modern chef blush. Street vendors concocted dishes with a creativity born out of necessity, blending whatever was on hand into something resembling a meal. It was improvisation at its finest, or perhaps its most desperate. As we navigate this murky world of ancient gastronomy, it's clear that Roman food safety was less about prevention and more about survival. The empire's appetite for taste often led them to flirt with danger, a dance between desire and consequence that feels all too familiar today. Whether it was a bowl of pulse or a sip of mulsum, every meal carried a risk, a gamble that spoke to the very heart of Roman life. So, as we digest these historical morsels, let's not forget the reality behind the romance. While we may crave the flavors of the past, it's worth remembering that every bite came with a side of danger. And yet, much like us, the Romans lived for the thrill of the taste, the promise of something new and exciting, even if it meant a trip to the latrine afterward. It's a tale as old as time. Humans will go to great lengths for a good meal, even if it means rolling the dice with their health. As we continue our deep dive into Rome's culinary tapestry, keep your appetite whetted for more stories of flavor and folly, for the empire's gastronomic journey is far from over. From the streets to the grand halls, food was more than sustenance. It was the spice of life, a reflection of Rome's paradoxical blend of decadence and practicality. And as we've seen, it was as complex and as risky as the empire itself. While we've meandered through the savory alleyways of ancient Rome's snack scene, it's time to chew on the legacy these culinary pioneers left behind. The echoes of Roman fast food resound in our own world more than a millennia later, a testament to how deeply ingrained the art of quick bites has become in human society. Let's start with the socio-economic tapestry that wove the Roman culinary landscape. The empire was a vast marketplace, a sprawling bazaar where the need for speed and convenience was as real as a gladiator's sword. Rome's bustling streets, teeming with thermopolia and parpany, acted as both a reflection and a driver of its socio-economic dynamics. These eateries weren't just about grabbing a bite. They were about accessibility and affordability. Just as an as could get you a bowl of pulse back in Rome, a dollar menu today offers a cheeseburger. Fast food's enduring appeal lies in its promise of sustenance without breaking the bank, a concept as timeless as the Colosseum. Now, let's imagine a Roman whisked through time to a modern-day food court. Picture him, toga-clad and wide-eyed, standing amidst the neon glow of fast food chains. The sensory overload alone, fries sizzling, soft drinks bubbling, might send him reeling back to the familiarity of garam's pungency. And the choices, burgers, tacos, sushi, all within arm's reach. The abundance would be astounding, yet strangely familiar. After all, the essence of fast food hasn't changed. It's about grabbing a meal with minimal fuss, whether you're in 100 AD or 2023. But let's not gloss over the darker side of this legacy. Much like Rome, modern society grapples with issues of food waste and health concerns. Romans piled amphorae high on Monte Testaccio, while we stack landfills with burger wrappers and soda cups. The same desire for cheap, fast, and tasty meals has led to a modern epidemic of convenience over nutrition. The Romans danced with danger, flirting with spoilage and lead-laced wine, and today we face our own health challenges, albeit with preservatives and trans fats instead of fermented fish sauce. And then there's the question of social equity. In Rome, a parpena was a place where classes mingled, where a plebeian might share a bench with a senator. Today, fast food remains a great leveler, offering a meal to anyone with a few coins to spare, regardless of social standing. Yet, it also highlights disparities, as healthier options often come at a premium. The echoes of Roman economic stratification still reverberate in the price difference between a salad and a burger. So, what does this all say about the evolution of our eating habits over centuries? Are we simply replaying the same culinary script, swapping pulse for fries and garum for ketchup? Or have we learned anything from our Roman forerunners besides how to make a mean olive oil? One might argue that while the tools and tastes have evolved, the human craving for convenience and connection remains unchanged. Our fast food culture, much like Rome's, speaks to a universal desire for accessibility, comfort, and a touch of indulgence. As we wrap up this historical feast, let's savor the irony that while we often seek to distance ourselves from the past, our dining habits suggest otherwise. The Romans might marvel at our technology and abundance, yet they'd recognize the spirit of our fast food culture as kindred to their own. So, next time you find yourself in a drive-thru, consider raising an imaginary goblet to the Parpeni and Thermopolia of old. They laid the groundwork for our hurried meals, a legacy as enduring as the empire from whence it came. And here's a morsel of thought to chew on. As we continue to innovate in our culinary practices, could the past offer solutions to our modern dilemmas? What if we look to ancient practices, not just for inspiration, but for answers to the challenges we face? Perhaps the ghosts of Rome's snack vendors have more to teach us about resilience, resourcefulness, and the art of dining without borders. With that, let's close the menu on this Roman culinary journey, leaving us to ponder the flavors of history and the taste of things to come. If you were to stride through the streets of the Harappan civilization, you might think you've stumbled onto the set of Ancient Urban Planning, the original series. Nestled comfortably around the Indus River, this ancient powerhouse was doing grid layouts and irrigation systems long before your local city council even dreamed of their first zoning meeting. Located in what's now Pakistan and northwest India, these folks were living large about 500 years ago, around 2600 to 1900 BCE. And let's not sugarcoat this, they were absolutely nailing it. Now, the Indus River isn't just any backdrop. It's the Bay and Say of rivers, an all-star supporting act that enabled the Harappans to build their civilization into something truly legendary. Stretching over 180 kilometers, it's like the Nile's cooler cousin, providing fertile soil and a reliable water source, the ultimate combo for any budding civilization. So, while the Harappans didn't have tick-tock to chronicle their rise, they certainly had the right geographical stage set for success. Let's take a moment to appreciate the Harappan urban planners who, in all likelihood, would roll their eyes at our modern cities' traffic jams and endless roadworks. Their cities, Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dhalavira, were the OGs of urban planning. They didn't just build cities, they engineered them with a sense of order that would make even the most fastidious city planner weep with joy. Streets were laid out in perfect grids, like someone had taken a giant protractor to the city, ensuring that everything had its place. It's like Sim City, but with less pixelation and more baked bricks. And speaking of bricks, the Harappans were all about that standardization life. Their baked bricks were uniform in size, which is more than you can say for most IKEA furniture these days. Imagine the sheer satisfaction. It's like if every Lego brick you ever owned was perfectly compatible. This consistency not only streamlined construction, but also hinted at a level of societal organization that was way ahead of its time. But here's where the Harappans really flexed their innovation muscles: water management. While today's urban developers are still trying to figure out how to handle a little rain without flooding the streets, the Harappans were constructing sophisticated drainage systems like they were playing a game of ancient plumber's paradise. Mohenjo-Daro, for instance, boasted a drainage system that would put some modern cities to shame. Each house had its own bathing area, and wastewater was channeled into covered drains along the main streets. Impressive, right? It's like they had a collective epiphany about hygiene and urban living that the rest of the world wouldn't catch up to for millennia. Now, let's not pretend that they were doing this purely for the love of cleanliness. The Harappans knew that managing water was key to their agricultural success. They harnessed the annual monsoon rains and river floods to nourish their fields, growing crops like wheat, barley, and peas. These guys weren't just surviving, they were thriving, feeding an estimated population of over 5 million at their peak. That's more people than the entire population of Los Angeles today, all sustained by their mastery over the land and water. And while we're on the subject of agriculture, let's debunk a little myth. The Harappans were not just passive recipients of the river's bounty. They were active participants, building an extensive network of canals and reservoirs to control water flow. Think of it as ancient hydraulic engineering, minus the modern machinery. It's like if Bob the Builder had a PhD in civil engineering and a penchant for large-scale irrigation projects. But hold your applause, because the Harappan story isn't just about impressive infrastructure. It's about how geography, ingenuity, and a little bit of luck intertwined to create a civilization that was as sophisticated as it was mysterious. They didn't leave behind grandiose monuments like the Egyptians or dramatic epics like the Mesopotamians, but their legacy is etched into the bricks and mortar of their cities, whispering tales of an advanced society that was way ahead of its time. Now, imagine if one of these Harappans were to time travel and land smack in the middle of a modern city. Picture their reaction to our skyscrapers and endless streams of traffic. They'd probably have a good laugh at our expense, pointing out that they solved urban gridlock thousands of years ago. They might even be impressed by our smartphones, until they realize we still haven't figured out how to build a city that doesn't flood after a heavy rain. The Harappan civilization was a testament to what human ingenuity can achieve when it's given the right environment and resources. Their story is one of adaptation and innovation, of building a world that was as practical as it was pioneering. And while they might have left us with more questions than answers, one thing is clear. The Harappans knew a thing or two about living smart. As we continue to dig through the layers of history they left behind, we're reminded that sometimes the most remarkable advances are found in the simplest of things, like a well-planned city or a perfectly baked brick. So, as we leave our Harappan time traveler chuckling at modern-day inefficiencies, let's teleport back to get a front-row seat to life in one of the world's earliest urban cultures. Picture this: a bustling community where public baths were just as essential as their sophisticated drainage systems. Yet, before spa days were a hashtag, the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro was the go-to spot for a good soak. This structure was no kiddie pool. It spanned about 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, and was around 4 meters deep. You could practically host a water polo match in there. But hold your breath. This wasn't just about hygiene. It had a certain ritualistic aura, a place where the lines between public and private life blurred like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. The Harappans didn't stop at leisurely baths. They had an obsession with beads that would make any modern-day jewelry lover swoon. These folks were the original craft enthusiasts, meticulously creating beads from materials like carnelian, agate, and even semi-precious stones. It was like Etsy, but without the shipping fees. Imagine the patience required. Each bead could take hours to perfect, and these weren't just baubles. They were currency, status symbols, and perhaps even had spiritual significance. It's almost enough to make you appreciate your grandmother's knitting habit. But let's not beat around the bush. The Harappans weren't just playing arts and crafts all day. Their economy was a vibrant tapestry woven with trade routes that stretched as far as Mesopotamia and modern-day Afghanistan. You might say they were the original global traders, long before anyone thought of frequent flyer miles. It's believed they exchanged goods like cotton, beads, and pottery for metals and luxury items. Picture a Harappan merchant haggling over the price of a lapis lazuli, chunk like it was the last avocado at Whole Foods. These trade negotiations weren't child's play. They involved complex bartering systems where goods were swapped with a finesse that would put any modern-day stockbroker to shame. Now, speaking of barter, let's delve into the Harappan economy. Barter was their Bitcoin, a decentralized system of trade that didn't require a single currency, but relied instead on the value of goods. It was a system built on trust and mutual need, where a few sacks of grain could be traded for a shiny new axe, minus the middleman's commission. In today's terms, it's like trading your old iPhone for a year's supply of avocados. Sure, it sounds quaint, but for the Harappans, it was a sophisticated economic model that fueled their civilization's growth. Despite the romantic allure of this barter system, let's keep it real. Harappan life wasn't all beads and baths. The absence of a decipherable written language leaves us with more questions than answers about the nitty-gritty of their daily lives. We're like detectives piecing together a mystery without the benefit of a confession. But what we do know paints a picture of a society where trade, agriculture, and urban planning converge to create a thriving community. Socially, the Harappans seem to favor a less hierarchical structure compared to their contemporaries, like the Egyptians or Mesopotamians. There's no evidence of grandiose palaces or elaborate tombs, which suggests a society where wealth and power were more evenly distributed. Think of it as ancient socialism with a side of practicality, an egalitarian ethos without the political manifestos. But before we get too starry-eyed about this ancient utopia, it's important to note that the Harappans weren't immune to the challenges of their time. Environmental changes, shifts in trade routes, and possibly internal strife could have contributed to their decline around 1900 BCE. It's a reminder that even the most advanced civilizations are vulnerable to the whims of nature and the complexities of human society. As we continue to explore the layers of Harappan history, it's clear that their legacy is one of innovation, adaptability, and a keen sense of practicality that resonates even today. They may not have left behind towering pyramids or epic tales, but their cities and artifacts tell a story of a civilization that was, in many ways, ahead of its time. So, as we navigate our own modern complexities, perhaps we can take a page from the Harappans' playbook. Sometimes, the most profound innovations come from balancing simplicity with ingenuity. And who knows, maybe one day, our descendants will look back at us with the same sense of awe and curiosity, marveling at our own peculiar obsessions and achievements. As we dive deeper into the enigma of the Harappan civilization, we find ourselves at a curious crossroads. You see, while their urban planners were busy winning gold medals in ancient city design, their political structure, or apparent lack thereof, was quietly tiptoeing past historians without so much as a hello. It's like they were the political Houdinis of their time, managing to run a complex society without the usual suspects of crowns, thrones, and royal decrees. Now, let's tackle the elephant in the room, or in this case, the absence of a royal elephant. Unlike their contemporaries, the Egyptians, who were busy building pyramids as glorified tombstones for their pharaohs, or the Mesopotamians, who were refining the art of kingly self-promotion, the Harappans seem to have skipped the whole monarchy memo. There's no evidence of palaces or grand monuments dedicated to a singular ruler. It's almost as if they thought, why bother? And went on with their day. But hold up, before we start painting the Harappans as the original egalitarian hipsters, it's worth noting that their political anonymity is as much a head-scratcher as it is a reason to break out the tambourines. Some scholars argue that this lack of visible hierarchy might have meant a more communal or collective form of governance. Imagine a society where city council meetings weren't dominated by power suits, but perhaps by a council of elders or merchants discussing the latest bead trends and drainage upgrades. However, let's not get too carried away with the notion of a peaceful utopia. The romantic idea of a harmonious society without strife is tempting, but it's also about as realistic as finding a unicorn grazing in your backyard. The truth is, without a decipherable script to fill in the blanks, we're left with more speculation than certainty. It's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing and no picture on the box. Speaking of scripts, the Harappan script is quite frankly the linguistic version of Schrödinger's cat. It exists, but in what state? That's anyone's guess. Found on seals, pottery, and other artifacts, this enigmatic script boasts around 400 symbols, each one more mysterious than the last. Despite decades of study, it remains undeciphered, leaving linguists and historians alike shaking their fists at the academic heavens. Imagine the frustration. It's like having a treasure chest full of historical insights, but the key is lost somewhere in the sands of time. The script's inscrutability adds a layer of intrigue to the Harappan political landscape. Without written records, we can only speculate on the nature of their governance. Was it a democracy avant la lettre, with decisions made by consensus rather than decree? Or perhaps a form of oligarchy, where a select few held sway behind the scenes? It's the kind of historical mystery that keeps scholars up at night, armed with coffee and a healthy dose of academic stubbornness. But let's not be too quick to assume that the absence of a decipherable script and visible hierarchy means perpetual peace and harmony. The archaeological record is notoriously silent on the matter of conflict, but silence doesn't always mean serenity. Without the dramatic ruins of battles or the remnants of fortifications, it's easy to romanticize the Harappan world as one of endless tranquility. Yet, it's equally plausible that internal conflicts and power struggles existed, masked by the sands and soils of their ancient cities. Archaeological silence can be deceptive, like a calm sea hiding treacherous currents beneath. It's entirely possible that the Harappans faced internal divisions or disputes, but their methods of conflict resolution, or the physical evidence thereof, have simply eluded us. Perhaps their disputes were settled through negotiation rather than warfare, or maybe their cities were too well organized for internal chaos to leave a lasting mark. It's a tantalizing thought. A civilization advanced enough to avoid the pitfalls of power struggles that plagued so many others. As we ponder these possibilities, it's important to remember the economic context that underpinned Harappan society. Their cities weren't just architectural marvels. They were economic hubs, buzzing with trade and industry. The lack of a centralized kingdom might have allowed for a more flexible economic system, where local communities had the autonomy to manage their own affairs. It's like an ancient version of decentralized governance, minus the blockchain. Trade routes stretched far and wide, connecting the Harappans with distant lands and cultures. This network of exchange was the lifeblood of their civilization, fueling growth and prosperity. It's possible that trade, rather than royal edicts, was the glue that held their society together, a testament to the power of economic interdependence. In a world where resources and goods flowed freely, perhaps the need for a singular ruler was less pressing. Yet, as we consider these economic dynamics, we must also acknowledge the challenges that came with them. The reliance on trade meant that any disruption, be it environmental changes, shifts in demand, or external threats, could have profound impacts on their society. It's a reminder that even the most advanced civilizations are subject to the whims of nature and the complexities of human interaction. So, as we sift through the remnants of Harappan society, grappling with its political mysteries and economic intricacies, we're left with a paradox. A civilization that was simultaneously advanced and enigmatic, structured yet seemingly leaderless. It's a story that challenges our assumptions about power and governance, inviting us to rethink what it means to lead and organize a society. As we continue this journey through Harappan history, we're reminded that the past is never static. It's a dynamic tapestry of stories and insights, waiting to be unraveled. And in the case of the Harappans, it's a tale that's as much about what we don't know as it is about what we do. So, let's keep digging, both literally and metaphorically, and see what other secrets this ancient civilization has in store for us. And so, as we dig through the literal nuts and bolts, or should I say, the baked bricks and bronze bits of Harappan society, it's time to marvel at their technological prowess. If you thought their urban planning was a flex, wait till you hear about what they were cooking up in metallurgy and architecture. Let's just say they weren't just building cities. They were crafting a legacy of innovation that would make a modern-day engineer nod in respect. First up, metallurgy. The Harappans were like the Iron Chef of the Bronze Age, except they didn't have TV cameras documenting their every move, just the archaeological record, which is a lot less forgiving. These folks were working with copper, bronze, lead, and tin, creating everything from tools to ornaments. They were even dabbling in what we might call early recycling, melting down and repurposing metal objects. Talk about resourcefulness. In an era when most people were still figuring out fire, the Harappans were busy creating alloys and conducting experiments that would make your high school chemistry class look like child's play. Now, while we're on the subject of copper, it's worth noting that the Harappans had a bit of a copper obsession. They sourced this metal from places like the Aravalli Range, which was the copper hotspot of the ancient world. Imagine the logistical gymnastics required to transport tons of raw material across hundreds of kilometers without the aid of trucks or cranes. It's like conducting an industrial revolution on foot, with a bit of elbow grease and a lot of determination. But let's not get too copper-crazed, because the real architectural magic happened in the way they built their cities. The Harappans didn't just lay bricks, they orchestrated them. Their structures were meticulously planned, using a standardized brick size that ensured stability and uniformity. It's like if every bricklayer had a PhD in precision engineering. And these weren't just any bricks, they were baked bricks, a step up from the sun-dried variety used by many contemporaries. This gave their buildings resilience against the elements, a feature that's kept their ancient cities from crumbling entirely into the dust of time. Now, let's tackle a well-loved myth head-on. The idea of Harappan green living. It's tempting to picture these ancient cities as proto-eco-paradises with their sophisticated waste management and urban planning. But before you start envisioning them as the original green warriors, clutching solar panels and compost bins, let's unpack this a bit. Sure, their cities were impressively clean by ancient standards, thanks to those covered drains and public baths. Yet, attributing a modern, eco-friendly ethos to them is like saying the Flintstones were pioneers in sustainable transport because they pedaled their cars. Their so-called green cities were more about practicality and survival than any philosophical commitment to Mother Earth. Managing water and waste efficiently was a necessity, not a choice. It was driven by the harsh realities of living in a region prone to flooding and drought. While their practices might align with our eco-friendly ideals today, for the Harappans, it was about keeping their cities from turning into swampy cesspools or dust bowls. It's less about hugging trees and more about not drowning in your own backyard. That said, you've got to hand it to the Harappans for their foresight. Their ability to adapt to their environment with such finesse is nothing short of remarkable. It's a reminder that sometimes necessity really is the mother of invention, even if that invention is a covered drainpipe. They proved that living sustainably doesn't always mean hugging a tree. Sometimes it means making sure your civilization doesn't float away with the next monsoon. Speaking of which, let's dive back into the economic currents that flowed through this ancient civilization. The Harappans were master traders, and their influence stretched far beyond the Indus Valley. They were the ancient world's answer to Amazon Prime, minus the 2-day shipping. Goods like beads, cotton, and pottery were exchanged for metals and luxury items from distant lands, creating a complex web of trade routes that connected them to places as far-flung as Mesopotamia. And let's not forget the economic engine that powered all this, agriculture. The Harappans weren't just planting seeds, they were cultivating a legacy. With their advanced irrigation systems, they were able to produce surplus crops, which in turn fueled trade and sustained a growing population. It's like they were running an ancient agribusiness, complete with crop rotation and water management practices that would make any modern farmer applaud. But even the most advanced systems have their limits. As we've seen, the Harappans eventually faced environmental challenges that contributed to their decline. The shifting course of the Indus River, coupled with changing climate patterns, disrupted their agricultural base. It's a poignant reminder that even the most sophisticated civilizations are at the mercy of nature's whims. So, as we leave this part of the Harappan tale open-ended, let's reflect on the delicate balance they achieved. Their story is one of innovation born out of necessity, of cities built not just to survive, but to thrive. And while they might not have had the eco-conscious intentions we romanticize today, they certainly understood the art of living harmoniously within their environment. As we transition into the next chapter, we'll continue to explore the layers of Harappan society, uncovering more of the mysteries that make this ancient civilization so captivating. From their technological triumphs to the enigmatic elements that still elude us, the Harappans offer a rich tapestry of history that beckons us to keep digging, both literally and metaphorically. Stay tuned as we unravel more of their story, one brick, bead, and baked brick at a time. As we continue to unravel the mystery of the Harappan civilization, we arrive at the part of the story that has intrigued historians and conspiracy theorists alike: its decline. Now, if you've ever heard a theory involving ancient aliens or a sudden vanishing act, buckle up, because we're about to poke some holes in those tales. Let's get one thing straight. The Harappans didn't just disappear like your socks in the dryer. Their decline was a bit more mundane, but no less dramatic. It was as if Mother Nature decided to shake things up, and the Harappans were caught in the middle of a cosmic game of musical chairs. First, let's talk about climate change, the ancient kind, not the modern heart-button issue. We're going back to around 1900 BCE, when the climate in the Indus Valley started playing a not-so-friendly game of switcheroo. The once reliable monsoons became erratic, like that one friend who promises to show up for coffee but never does. An extended period of weakened monsoons led to less water in the rivers, which meant less irrigation, and you guessed it, less food. It's hard to maintain a thriving civilization when your crops are staging a hunger strike. Now, factor in the changing course of the Indus River. The river, which had been the bay and say of rivers for the Harappans, decided it needed a new direction, quite literally. The river's shifting course meant that some of the major cities found themselves high and dry, quite literally left in the dust as trade routes and economic lifelines dried up. Suddenly, those sophisticated drainage systems and urban plans were about as useful as snow boots in a desert. This brings us to the next component of their decline: shifting trade routes. Imagine being the cornerstone of ancient trade, only to find the world moving on without you. As the Harappans were grappling with environmental changes, trade routes began to shift towards the east, favoring the burgeoning civilizations in the Ganges plain. It's like being the star player benched while the coach drafts new talent. The economic ripple effects were profound, leading to a decline in the prosperity that had sustained their cities for centuries. But let's pause to debunk a popular myth, the idea of a catastrophic and sudden collapse. The decline of the Harappan civilization wasn't some blockbuster movie climax with cities crumbling overnight. It was more of a slow fade, like a TV series that quietly gets cancelled after the ratings drop. Archaeological evidence points to a gradual abandonment of urban centers, with people moving to smaller settlements. It's a classic case of adapt or migrate, and the Harappans chose the latter. Now, what about those romanticized notions of mysterious vanishing acts? They're about as plausible as finding a unicorn in your garage. The truth is, the Harappans didn't vanish into thin air. Their descendants likely integrated into new cultures and societies, contributing to the rich tapestry of South Asian history. It's a reminder that civilizations don't just disappear. They evolve, adapt, and leave their mark in ways that might not always be visible at first glance. As we reflect on the Harappan decline, it's hard not to draw parallels with modern scenarios. The environmental challenges they faced echo today's climate crises, where extreme weather and shifting landscapes pose existential threats. Similarly, the economic shifts that left the Harappans behind remind us of the volatility of global trade, where once dominant players can find themselves sidelined as new powers rise. It's a sobering reminder that history has a way of repeating itself, and those who fail to learn from the past are doomed to repeat its mistakes. And here's where we find the real value in the Harappan story. It's a lesson in adaptability. Despite the challenges that led to their decline, the Harappans demonstrated an incredible ability to innovate and thrive in their environment. They remind us that survival isn't just about holding on to what you have. It's about knowing when to let go and adapt to new realities. It's a message that resonates today as we face our own set of challenges in a rapidly changing world. So as we wrap up this exploration of the Harappan civilization, let's take a moment to appreciate their legacy. They may not have left behind soaring pyramids or epic tales, but their contributions to urban planning, trade, and technological innovation are undeniable. They were the original architects of practicality, crafting a world that was both advanced and adaptable. In the end, the Harappans remind us that history is not just about the rise and fall of empires. It's about the enduring legacies that shape the world long after the dust has settled. Their story is a testament to human ingenuity and resilience, a narrative that continues to inspire us as we navigate the complexities of our own time. So let's tip our hats to the Harappans, those ancient urban planners and traders extraordinaire, and carry their lessons forward as we build the future, one baked brick at a time. If you ever wanted to know who the ancient world's influencers were, look no further than the Phoenicians. These folks were the OG brand builders, and they didn't just stop at slapping their mark on a clay part. Nope, they gave us the very alphabet most of us are using today. Yeah, that's right. You're reading this thanks to some savvy traders who knew their way around a boat and a papyrus scroll. The Phoenicians, cruising around the Mediterranean like the ancient world's answer to Jeff Bezos, had a knack for making their mark on history. They were from a cluster of city-states along the coastline of what is now Lebanon, and they were all about that maritime life. Around 1500 BCE, they started spreading their influence not by conquering lands, but by trading their goods, which is way cooler and less bloody if you ask me, with a definition of work smarter, not harder. Now, let's talk about their social media moment, the alphabet. Before the Phoenicians, writing systems were a bit of a mess. You had to memorize thousands of symbols, which was about as fun as trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. But the Phoenicians, in a stroke of genius, decided to streamline the whole thing around 1050 BCE. They created an alphabet with 22 letters, no vowels, but hey, it was a start. This made writing accessible, sort of like giving everyone the keys to the kingdom. And just like that, the Phoenician alphabet went viral, spreading through the Mediterranean faster than you can say TikTok trend. It influenced Greek, which later influenced Latin, and here we are still using their clever little system. But let's not glaze over their other claim to fame, purple dye. Trust me, this isn't just any old dye. We're talking Tyrian purple, the kind that made Roman emperors look at their togas and go, I need that. Extracted from the murex snail, this dye was more exclusive than a red carpet event. To give you an idea of its prestige, it took about 10,000 snails to produce just 1 gram of dye. That's right, 10,000 slimy, smelly mollusks for enough dye to color a toga. Talk about commitment to your brand. And the cost. Let's just say you'd need a wallet as deep as the Mediterranean itself. The Phoenicians were masters of supply and demand. They knew that the scarcity of Tyrian purple made it the ultimate status symbol. It was the ancient equivalent of a diamond-encrusted smartwatch. Not everyone could afford it, and that's precisely why everyone wanted it. The Romans later turned it into a status symbol of power, with laws stating only the emperor could wear it. Imagine passing a law about who gets to wear purple. Now, that's branding power. These folks didn't just leave behind trade routes and city names. They left a legacy that whispered through the ages. They showed us that the pen, or in their case the stylus, could indeed be mightier than the sword. The Phoenicians didn't need grand armies. They had grand ideas, and those ideas, they stuck around. The alphabet and Tyrian purple dye were just the beginning of their cultural revolution. They set the stage for a world that would come to value not just the might of empires, but the power of ideas and innovation. So next time you jot down a note or admire a deep purple garment, give a little nod to the Phoenicians. They were the trendsetters who proved that sometimes the most enduring empires aren't built on land, but on the waves of innovation and the currents of culture. The Phoenicians' legacy didn't just float around in cultural tidbits like alphabets and dyes. Oh no, these ancient maritime maestros practically wrote the book on seafaring, if they had been the book-riding kind, that is. You see, these folks weren't just paddling around in little dinghies. They were the maritime equivalent of Formula One drivers, steering their ships with such prowess that they made Poseidon look like he needed a few sailing lessons. Let's start with their ships. The Phoenicians' vessels were the stuff of legend, and for good reason. These were sleek, nimble crafts designed for speed and endurance. Picture a Formula One car but on water, and instead of tires, you've got oars and sails. They were typically built using the sturdy timbers of the Lebanese cedar trees. Yes, the same trees that today are as symbolic to Lebanon as croissants are to France. These ships, known as biremes and triremes, were double-decked, sporting 2 or 3 rows of oarsmen, which gave them the extra oomph to cut through the Mediterranean waves like a hot knife through salted butter. But it wasn't just about the boats. The Phoenicians were masters at navigation, and this was well before GPS or even the invention of the compass. They read the stars like a millennial reads a smartphone, using celestial navigation to guide their way across the open waters. Think of them like the Christopher Columbuses of their day, but with a better sense of direction and significantly less inclination to bump into other continents by accident. Now, let's talk trade. The Phoenicians weren't content with just sailing for the sake of it. They were the original globetrotters, establishing trade networks that stretched from the shores of the Levant all the way to the British Isles. That's roughly 3,000 miles, or about 4,800 kilometers, for those keeping track at home. And what were they trading, you ask? Just about everything that wasn't nailed down, from the aforementioned Tyrian purple dye to glass, metals, and even the occasional luxury good that would make your average consumer drool. Their trade networks were so vast and intricate that they practically invented the concept of international commerce. They were the Amazon Prime of their day, delivering goods faster than you could say, next-day shipping. Need some exotic spices from the east? The Phoenicians had you covered. Fancy a bit of tin from the British Isles? They were on it. They even traded cedar wood, which was in such high demand that it practically became the ancient world's version of a must-have-home accessory. Economically, the Phoenicians were powerhouses. Their ability to control trade routes meant they could dictate terms and prices, making them the ultimate middlemen. They were like the stockbrokers of the Mediterranean, buying low and selling high, and raking in profits that would make even the greediest Wall Street banker blush. This economic muscle allowed them to build prosperous city-states like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, which became bustling hubs of trade and culture. But here's the kicker. Despite their immense wealth and influence, the Phoenicians were never conquerors in the traditional sense. They didn't amass armies to subjugate others. Instead, they let their ships and their goods do the talking. It was a different kind of power, one that relied on persuasion and economic might rather than brute force. They understood that sometimes the best way to win a game is not to play it at all, but to change the rules entirely. And yet, like any good legend, there are myths that need debunking. One common misconception is that the Phoenicians were a single, unified empire. In reality, they were more like a collection of fiercely independent city-states, each with its own ruler and agenda. Imagine a family reunion where no one can agree on where to go for dinner. That's the Phoenicians. They might have shared a language and a culture, but politically, they were as fragmented as a jigsaw puzzle, missing a few pieces. Their legacy, however, is undeniable. The Phoenicians didn't just sail the seas, they owned them. They set the stage for the development of global trade routes that would influence economies for centuries to come. Their voyages paved the way for cultural exchanges that enriched the civilizations of the Mediterranean and beyond. In doing so, they proved that sometimes the most enduring empires aren't built with swords and shields, but with sails and stars. So, the next time you order something online or navigate an app to find your way home, spare a thought for the Phoenicians. They were the original innovators, the trailblazers of their time, who showed the world that true power lies in the ability to connect, to trade, and to discover. And while their ships may no longer sail, their influence continues to ripple across the seas of history, reminding us that sometimes the greatest voyages are those that take us beyond the horizon of the known. As the Phoenician ships sailed the Mediterranean, leaving trails of cedar-scented commerce in their wake, they were also navigating a much murkier sea, the political landscape of ancient empires. Picture this. The Mediterranean was less a peaceful body of water and more a geopolitical chessboard, with the Phoenicians playing a game that would make even Machiavelli nod in approval. Their strategy: be everyone's best friend, but never trust anyone too much. This was the ancient version of having your cake and eating it too, and boy, did they bake a mean cake. First, let's talk Egypt. By the time the Phoenicians were making waves, both literally and metaphorically, Egypt was the heavyweight champ of the ancient world. We're talking about a civilization that had been around for millennia, long enough to know a thing or two about power dynamics. The Phoenicians, recognizing a golden opportunity when they saw one, cozied up to the Egyptians like a cat to a sunbeam. They exchanged goods and ideas with the Egyptians, trading their precious cedar wood and the coveted Tyrian purple for Egyptian gold, linen, and papyrus. This was a relationship built on mutual respect and a shared love of shiny things. But it wasn't all sunshine and pyramids. The Phoenicians were savvy enough to understand that alliances could shift as quickly as the Mediterranean winds. So, while they were playing nice with the Egyptians, they were also eyeing other potential allies. Enter Rome, the scrappy up-and-comer that would eventually become the biggest bully on the block. At first, the Romans were just a bunch of city-states trying to figure out how to wear a toga without tripping. But as they grew in power, the Phoenicians saw another opportunity to hedge their bets. The Carthaginians, descendants of Phoenician settlers, became Rome's frenemies in what historians like to call the Punic Wars, which sounds much more polite than they actually were. The Phoenicians in Carthage were like that one friend who seems to thrive on drama, embroiling themselves in a series of conflicts with Rome that would last over a century. The First Punic War kicked off in 264 BCE over Sicily, a small island with big ambitions and even bigger strategic importance. For the Phoenicians, controlling Sicily was akin to owning Boardwalk and Park Place in Monopoly. It was all about location, location, location. But here's where it gets juicy. The Phoenicians were experts at playing the long game. They knew when to retreat, when to advance, and when to just sit back and let others do the heavy lifting. During the Second Punic War, the legendary Carthaginian general Hannibal led his troops, including war elephants, over the Alps to surprise the Romans, a move so audacious that it still gets a standing ovation from history buffs. Yet, despite Hannibal's brilliance, Rome's relentless persistence eventually wore Carthage down. By the end of the Third Punic War in 146 BCE, Carthage was reduced to ashes, quite literally, as the Romans burned the city to the ground and salted the earth, ensuring nothing would grow there again. Talk about holding a grudge. Now, let's dispel a myth or two. It's tempting to romanticize the Phoenicians as a unified empire, a maritime Atlantis with a single ruler commanding the waves. But the truth is, they were more like the confederation of independent trade stations. Each city-state, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, was its own little kingdom, complete with rivalries and sibling squabbles. They might have shared a language and culture, but politically they were as cohesive as a bag of cats. This lack of unity was both their strength and their Achilles heel, allowing them to be flexible in their alliances, but also preventing them from presenting a united front when it really mattered. Despite the fragmented political landscape, the Phoenicians' ability to navigate alliances was nothing short of impressive. They were the ultimate realpolitik players, understanding that power was as much about perception as it was about reality. They didn't need to wield swords. Their greatest weapon was their ability to adapt, to blend into the background when necessary, and to emerge when the moment was right. This adaptability was their true legacy, a lesson in how to survive and thrive in a world where alliances shifted like desert sands. But let's not get carried away with admiration. The Phoenicians were also opportunists of the highest order. They knew how to exploit a situation for maximum gain, whether it was selling their purple dye to the highest bidder or negotiating trade deals that favored them heavily. They were the ultimate pragmatists, understanding that in a world of empires, it was better to be a useful ally than a conquered enemy. So, as we sail through this sea of history, let's remember that the Phoenicians were not just traders and sailors, but also shrewd political operators. They navigated the complex web of ancient geopolitics with all the grace of their legendary ships, proving that sometimes the best way to win a game is to play it from the sidelines, watching and waiting for the perfect opportunity to make your move. Their story is a testament to the power of adaptability, a reminder that in the grand game of history, it's not always the strongest who survive, but the most resourceful. And while their cities may have crumbled, their legacy of political savvy and maritime mastery continues to ripple through time, leaving us with lessons as valuable as the treasures they once traded. Now, as we continue to wade through the murky waters of Phoenician lore, it's time to tackle their most notorious reputation, child sacrificers. Yep, you heard that right. The Phoenicians, particularly those in Carthage, have long been accused of tossing their kids into the fiery embrace of Baal Hammon, their chief deity. But before you start imagining a scene out of an ancient horror movie, let's sift through the evidence and separate fact from fiction. Because, as with all good legends, there's a bit of truth mixed with a whole lot of sensationalism. First, the allegations. Ancient sources, especially the Romans and Greeks, were quick to paint the Phoenicians as barbaric baby burners. It's important to remember that these accounts often came from their enemies, folks who had every reason to smear the Phoenicians with the dirtiest of brushes. Think of it like an ancient game of telephone, where the story gets more gruesome with each retelling. Roman authors like Tertullian and Plutarch spun tales of mass child sacrifices, describing Tafits, sacrificial sites, filled with the remains of infants. It's enough to make your skin crawl, but let's hold up and dig deeper. Archaeological evidence does suggest that Phoenician sites like Carthage contained Tafits with urns of cremated bones. However, here's the twist. Not all the remains belong to infants, and the number of children found doesn't match the grandiose claims of mass sacrifice. It's more likely that these sites were burial grounds for children who died from natural causes, perhaps with ritualistic elements added in. In a time when infant mortality was tragically high, estimates suggest up to 30% of children didn't make it past their first year. It's not entirely far-fetched. So, where's the truth in this grim tale? Well, it's possible that child sacrifice did occur, but perhaps not on the industrial scale the Romans loved to describe. It may have been a ritual reserved for dire circumstances, like a city under siege or a particularly stubborn drought. In those desperate times, some Phoenicians might have thought that making the ultimate offering could curry favor with their gods. But let's not jump to conclusions and assume every Phoenician parent was ready to volunteer their offspring for the bonfire. Why did these gruesome tales gain traction? Simple: propaganda. The Romans, masters of narrative warfare, had every reason to depict their Carthaginian foes as monstrous villains. Demonizing an enemy made conquest not just a military necessity, but a moral imperative. It's much easier to rally troops against a child-sacrificing cult than a bunch of savvy traders who excelled in maritime navigation. Talk about a PR nightmare for the Phoenicians. Behind the smoke and mirrors, the Phoenicians were more complex, and in some ways, relatable than these horror stories suggest. They were a people driven by commerce, innovation, and a touch of mysticism. Their religious practices, while different from the Greco-Roman norms, were not entirely outside the realm of ancient customs. Many civilizations had rituals that modern sensibilities would find appalling. The Aztecs, for example, were known for their human sacrifices, and even the Romans occasionally practiced infanticide for population control. The Phoenicians were part of this historical tapestry, not the outliers. Beyond the inflammatory headlines, the Phoenicians left a legacy of cultural syncretism, blending their own traditions with those of the lands they touched. This cultural exchange was a two-way street. While they introduced the alphabet and purple dye, they also absorbed and adapted foreign deities and customs into their own pantheon. It's like a historical potluck where everyone brings a dish, and the Phoenicians were the ultimate hosts, sampling everything and adding their own twist. In the end, the myth of the Phoenicians as child-sacrificing monsters is more indicative of the power of propaganda than historical reality. It's a reminder that history is often written by the victors, with enough bias to fill a Tafit. Yet, we must acknowledge the possibility that some dark rituals did occur, perhaps driven by fear and desperation rather than sheer malice. So, as we navigate these ancient tales, let's keep our wits about us. The Phoenicians were not saints, but neither were they the villains of a horror saga. They were a people who thrived on the edge of the known world, balancing commerce and culture with the capricious whims of the gods. Their story is a testament to the duality of human nature, the brilliance of innovation alongside the shadows of superstition. As we sail onward in our exploration of their legacy, let's remember that history is rarely black and white, but a tapestry woven with threads of truth and myth, each strand as important as the last. As the smoke clears from the fires of sensationalism, let's sift through the ashes to find what truly remains of the Phoenicians' legacy. Sure, they may have had a flair for the dramatic, but don't we all have a skeleton or two in our closets? Or in their case, perhaps a murex snail or 10,000. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty of their lasting impact, let's take a quick detour to their ultimate downfall, a tale as old as time. Success breeds envy, and envy often brings trouble. By the time the Roman Republic started flexing its muscles, the Phoenicians had already established themselves as the maritime maestros of the Mediterranean. But as Rome's power expanded, so did their appetite for control, much like that friend who insists on ordering for the entire table. The Punic Wars, particularly the third one, finally drew the curtain on Carthage in 146 BCE. The Romans, ever the dramatic conquerors, didn't just defeat Carthage, they razed it to the ground and salted the earth. Talk about overkill. It was less about military strategy and more about sending a message. Don't mess with Rome or else. But what about the aftermath? Did the Phoenicians vanish like smoke in the wind? Not quite. While Carthage crumbled, the Phoenician spirit lingered, entwined with the very cultural DNA of the Mediterranean. Their city-states, like Tyre and Sidon, continued to thrive under new rulers, their innovations spreading far beyond their original shores. It's like if your favorite band breaks up, but their songs keep playing on the radio. Let's talk legacy, shall we? The Phoenicians were the original networkers, long before LinkedIn made it cool. They didn't just trade goods, they traded ideas, merging cultures in a way that was less hostile takeover and more friendly collaboration. Their alphabet was a game changer, influencing Greek, Latin, and eventually every Western language. It's the ancient equivalent of dropping a killer app that everyone wants to download. And let's not forget their seafaring prowess. They were the GPS of their day, navigating the high seas with nothing but the stars and an uncanny sense of direction. It's no wonder their maritime skills became the stuff of legend. But it wasn't just about the physical artifacts they left behind, those cedar ships and purple-dyed robes. The Phoenicians planted seeds of globalization long before it was a buzzword. Their trade networks were the arteries of the ancient world, pumping life into distant lands and connecting disparate cultures. They taught us that trade can be a tool of diplomacy, a way to build bridges rather than walls. It's a lesson that resonates even today in our interconnected world. Now, let's debunk another myth, that of the unified Phoenician Empire. These guys were more like a loose collection of city-states, each with its own agenda and ruler. Think of them as rival tech startups, each vying for a slice of the Mediterranean pie, but occasionally teaming up for a bigger cause. This lack of cohesion was both their Achilles heel and their strength, allowing them to adapt and pivot when necessary. They weren't tied down by a singular identity, which in turn made them incredibly flexible in the face of change. Economically, the Phoenicians were the Wall Street traders of their time. They understood the value of supply and demand long before Adam Smith put pen to paper. By controlling key trade routes and producing high-demand goods like Tyrian purple, they wielded economic power that rivaled any empire's military might. They proved that sometimes the pen, or the trade agreement, is mightier than the sword. Culturally, their influence was like a gentle tide, shaping the shores of what would become Western civilization. They didn't conquer with armies. They conquered with ideas and innovations. Their blend of commerce, culture, and diplomacy laid the groundwork for what would become the Hellenistic world and eventually the Roman Empire. The Phoenicians were the unsung architects of cultural fusion, showing that the exchange of ideas is as vital as the exchange of goods. So, what's the takeaway from our Phoenician adventure? Perhaps it's that real power doesn't always come from the barrel of a gun, or in ancient terms, the tip of a spear. Sometimes, it's about being the smartest, not the strongest. It's about knowing when to sail with the tide, and when to create your own current. The Phoenicians taught us that innovation, adaptability, a little bit of cunning, can outlast even the mightiest of empires. As we wrap up this journey through the waves of history, let's give a nod to the Phoenicians, those ancient influencers who showed us that true legacy is more than just monuments and military victories. It's about the ideas and innovations that ripple through time, touching lives in ways that swords and shields never could. Their story is a testament to the enduring power of culture and commerce, proving that sometimes the most profound empires aren't built on land, but on the shared knowledge and connections that bind us all. So, the next time you jot down a note or navigate a digital map, remember the Phoenicians. They may have sailed into the sunset of history, but their legacy remains, a guiding star for those who dare to explore the uncharted waters of innovation and human connection. And in a world that often feels divided, perhaps their greatest lesson is this: that true strength lies not in conquering others, but in uniting them through the timeless currents of culture, commerce, and collaboration. In the realm of ancient history, where myths often masquerade as reality, the Etruscans are like that mysterious neighbor you know exists, but have never really met. They were the civilization that had a pretty good gig going in Italy before the Romans swaggered in and decided to build an empire. Think of the Etruscans as the cool indie band that was eventually overshadowed by the stadium rock act of Rome. But before we dive into how they set the stage for Roman success, let's tackle their origin story, because honestly, it's a bit of a head-scratcher. The Etruscans are like the historical equivalent of those enigmatic indie rockers who may have hailed from a distant, mystical land. Some suggest they originated from the east, possibly Anatolia, which is modern Turkey, bringing with them a cultural toolkit that would later influence Roman society. Herodotus, the great Greek historian, was one of the first to float this idea around 500 BCE, suggesting a migration due to a famine. But then again, Herodotus was also the guy who talked about ants the size of foxes in Persia. So take that with a grain of salt the size of a Mediterranean olive. Others propose they were locals all along, developing their civilization right in the heart of Italy. And let's not forget the theory that they were simply a fusion of various cultures in the region. The truth is, we still don't have a definitive answer, and that's part of their allure. Now, onto their language, a delightful puzzle that has kept scholars up at night for centuries. The Etruscan language is like that cryptic crossword your brainy friend insists is easy, but leaves you feeling like you need a nap. It's not related to any known language family, and while we have some inscriptions, the vocabulary remains largely a mystery. We do know they wrote using an alphabet similar to Greek, but here's the kicker. Most of what they wrote wasn't exactly war and peace. Think more along the lines of "this belongs to Marcus," or "property of Lucius." It's the ancient equivalent of labeling your lunch in the office fridge. Geographically, the Etruscans staked their claim in what we now call Tuscany and northern Lazio. Picture a region of rolling hills, lush vineyards, and a coastline that screams for a summer getaway. Basically, Instagram heaven. This prime real estate allowed them to become prosperous traders, dealing in everything from wine to metalwork. They weren't just savvy merchants, they were also urban innovators. Their city-states, places like Tarquinia, Cerveteri, and Veii, were the kind of urban planning that would make even the Romans take notes. These cities featured complex layouts, sophisticated drainage systems, and architecture that whispered to the Romans, "Here's how it's done." In the grand tapestry of history, the Etruscans are often portrayed as the enigmatic prelude to the Roman epic. But let's not gloss over their contribution with broad strokes of romanticism. Their confounding language and uncertain origins are not just charming quirks. They're evidence of a civilization that was dynamic, adaptable, and complex. They built the scaffolding upon which Rome would construct its mighty empire. So the next time you marvel at Roman achievements, remember that the Etruscans were the ones who first drew the blueprints. And let's face it, without them, Rome might have just been another city-state squabbling over sheep and olives. So, you've got the Etruscans setting the stage for Rome, and what a stage it was, complete with arches, the architectural darlings that would eventually support the grandeur of Roman aqueducts and amphitheaters. Before you get the idea that arches just appeared out of nowhere like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat, let's give credit where credit's due. The Etruscans weren't just erecting arches for decoration. They were structural geniuses, using them as the skeletal backbone of their bridges and temples. This little piece of engineering wizardry was like handing the Romans a cheat sheet for their future architectural triumphs. It's like your older sibling teaching you the ropes of a video game before you go on to become the world champion. Now, let's shift focus to the divine and the mystical, a realm where the Etruscans truly flexed their cultural muscles. Religious rituals and divination practices were their jam. You see, the Etruscans had a heartline to the heavens, or at least they thought so. They practiced something called haruspicy, which is as fun to say as it is to imagine. Picture this, a priest, draped in ceremonial garb, slicing open a sacrificial animal to interpret the will of the gods from its entrails. It sounds like a scene from a horror movie, but for the Etruscans, it was serious business. This gut-wrenching practice, pun intended, was their way of making sense of the world, and they passed this tradition down to the Romans, who embraced the entrail-inspecting lifestyle with gusto. Let's not forget their sophisticated metallurgy. The Etruscans were like the blacksmiths of Olympus, crafting bronze and iron with a finesse that made their neighbors look like they were still figuring out how to make fire. They produced everything from weapons to intricate jewelry, items so fine they could have had their own corner in an ancient Italian version of a high-end department store. Their artistry was the Gucci of antiquity, setting trends long before Italy became synonymous with fashion. The Romans absorbed this craft like a sponge, but let's be honest, without the Etruscans' metal magic, Roman armor might have looked more like tin cans than the formidable gear we picture today. While we're on the subject of sophisticated creations, let's appreciate the Etruscan art scene. Their pottery alone was Instagram-worthy, with black and red figures that depicted everything from epic battles to mundane daily life. It was like a visual diary etched in clay. Their tombs were galleries of life and death, adorned with frescoes that celebrated both the living and the dearly departed. These artistic endeavors weren't just about aesthetics. They were deeply woven into the social and religious fabric of Etruscan life, offering a glimpse into what they valued and feared. The Romans, ever the keen observers, took notes and later applied these artistic touches to their own grand narratives. Now, if you think the Etruscans were just about building and crafting, think again. This was a society that knew how to keep things interesting on the social front. Women in Etruscan society enjoyed rights and freedoms that would make their Roman counterparts green with envy. Forget the image of the demure damsel in distress. Etruscan women were active participants in social and political life. They could own property, partake in banquets, and even toast with the best of them, luxuries that Roman women could only dream of. It's like comparing a modern-day CEO to a 1950s housewife, with the Etruscans firmly in the progressive camp. When we talk about gender roles, it's easy to paint with broad strokes, but let's not fall into that trap. The Etruscans didn't just talk the talk, they walked the walk. Their depictions in art often show men and women dining together, an egalitarian scenario that was as rare in ancient cultures as a unicorn sighting. While the Romans were busy keeping their women in the domestic sphere, the Etruscans were letting theirs mingle and mix in high society. This social structure wasn't just a quaint aside. It was a reflection of a civilization that valued diversity and complexity in its social interactions. So, how did these cool cats of antiquity influence the Romans? Well, the Romans were like cultural magpies, snatching shiny ideas from their Etruscan neighbors and incorporating them into their own civilization. From the toga to the Roman numerals, the Etruscan fingerprints are all over Roman culture. But let's not romanticize this as some sort of seamless cultural exchange. The Romans, in their quest for dominance, often steamrolled over the Etruscans, absorbing their innovations while conveniently forgetting to mention where they got them. It's the age-old tale of the victor riding history, leaving the Etruscans in the footnotes. In the grand mosaic of history, the Etruscans are the tesserae, those tiny pieces that form a bigger picture. Without them, the Roman mosaic would be missing some of its most vibrant colors and intricate patterns. So, as we continue to unravel the tapestry of the past, remember that the Etruscans were more than just a prelude to Roman greatness. They were the architects of their own legacy, and while their language may remain a mystery, their influence is as clear as the arches they left behind. As we transition from the Etruscan social scene to their economic prowess, let's dive into the world of ancient trade, where these folks were the real MVPs. Forget your run-of-the-mill barter system. The Etruscans were playing the long game with precious metals and luxury goods. Their economy was driven by a savvy understanding of trade networks that would make even the most seasoned Wall Street brokers nod in approval. They weren't just trading for trinkets. They were dealing in big-ticket items like copper and iron, essential for weaponry and tools. And let's not underestimate the bling factor. Etruscan jewelry, crafted from gold and silver, was the kind of stuff that would have made even the most austere Roman senator drool with envy. The Etruscans had access to mineral-rich territories, especially in Tuscany and Elba, where they mined their precious metals. This wasn't some small-scale operation. They were extracting hundreds of tons annually. By the 7th century BCE, they had forged extensive trade networks reaching as far as the Aegean and North Africa. They were the ancient equivalent of a global brand, their products sought after from the coasts of Spain to the bustling markets of the eastern Mediterranean. This wasn't just trade. This was an economic coup, allowing them to amass wealth and influence that would have made their neighbors green with envy. Now, let's talk agriculture, because the Etruscans weren't just about mining and metallurgy. They were cultivating land with techniques that were centuries ahead of their time. Think of them as the original farm-to-table enthusiasts, but instead of kale and quinoa, they were dealing with wheat, barley, and grapes. Their advanced methods included crop rotation and irrigation systems that maximized productivity and ensured their city-states were well-fed and primed for trade. They even had a knack for viticulture, cultivating vineyards that produced wines highly valued across the Mediterranean. Next time you sip on a Tuscan wine, remember you're tasting a tradition that goes back to the Etruscans. And in the spirit of innovation, the Etruscans went from a monarchy to a republican form of government, a political shuffle that prefigured the Roman Republic. This transition wasn't just about swapping crowns for togas. It was a seismic shift in political power and governance. By the 6th century BCE, Etruscan city-states began experimenting with a system where power wasn't handed down like an heirloom, but was instead a rotating gig among the elite. This early form of republicanism allowed for a more inclusive governance structure, paving the way for political stability, and you guessed it, a thriving economy. It's almost as if the Etruscans were beta testing the political apps the Romans would later run with. But it wasn't all sunshine and trade wins. The Etruscans had strategic alliances and, naturally, some epic rivalries. Their trading prowess attracted attention, both welcome and otherwise, from heavyweight neighbors like the Greeks and the Carthaginians. The Greeks, with their colonies in southern Italy, were both partners and competitors, leading to a complex relationship that was part arms race, part cultural exchange. Meanwhile, the Carthaginians, those savvy seafaring merchants from North Africa, were both allies and adversaries. The Etruscans and Carthaginians even teamed up against the Greeks in the Battle of Alalia around 540 BCE, a naval showdown that underscored the shifting alliances and power plays of the time. These entanglements in Mediterranean geopolitics were more than just a game of risk. They were about securing trade routes and protecting economic interests. The Etruscans were strategic players in this ancient game of thrones, balancing alliances and rivalries to maintain their influence. Yet, like a high-stakes poker game, the odds weren't always in their favor. The growing power of Rome and the relentless push of the Greeks eventually spelled trouble for the Etruscans as their territories became increasingly contested. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Etruscans didn't just fade quietly into the historical ether. They left their mark on the burgeoning Roman culture, from religious rituals to urban planning, ensuring their legacy would live on even as their political power waned. Their story is one of resilience and adaptability, a testament to the complexities of ancient civilization. As we continue to unravel the Etruscan saga, remember, they were more than just a prelude to Rome. They were a civilization that thrived on innovation, trade, and cultural exchange, setting the stage for the epic that was to follow. The Etruscans stood at the crossroads of their destiny. They were like a seasoned chess player who suddenly found themselves up against a grandmaster, Rome. The 4th century BCE marked the beginning of the end for the Etruscans, as the Roman Republic started flexing its muscles, eager to expand its territory like a bodybuilder on a protein binge. The Etruscans, once the undisputed influencers of the Italian peninsula, were now facing a foe whose ambition knew no bounds. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of this ancient turf war, starting with the Battle of Veii in 396 BCE. Veii, an Etruscan city just a stone's throw from Rome, about 16 kilometers to be precise, was the first domino to fall. The Romans, under the command of the fierce, and let's be honest, slightly megalomaniacal Marcus Furius Camillus, laid siege to Veii for 10 years. Yes, you heard that right. A decade-long siege. It was the ancient equivalent of a never-ending reality TV show, except with more blood and fewer commercial breaks. When Veii finally succumbed, it was a watershed moment for Rome. The victory was like winning a golden ticket to Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, except the prize was power and land, not candy. The Romans seized the opportunity to assimilate Veii resources and people, setting a precedent for their future conquests. And this wasn't just a hostile takeover. It was a strategic move that allowed Rome to control key trade routes and resources, paving the way for its dominance. But the fall of Veii was just the beginning. The Etruscans, stubborn and resilient, weren't about to roll over without a fight. Throughout the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, they engaged the Romans in a series of skirmishes and battles that were as relentless as a caffeinated squirrel on a sugar rush. The Battle of the Allia in 390 BCE was another nail in the Etruscan coffin, where their Celtic allies were defeated by the Romans, leaving the Etruscans more isolated than a hipster at a country music festival. Politically, the Etruscans were playing a high-stakes game of poker with Rome, and their hand was looking increasingly weak. The Roman strategy was as cunning as it was ruthless: divide and conquer. They systematically targeted Etruscan city-states, exploiting rivalries and forming alliances that would make Machiavelli proud. By the time the dust settled, the Etruscans found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned. The final blow came in 283 BCE with the Battle of Lake Vadaman. The Romans, led by the formidable consul Publius Cornelius Dalabella, clashed with the Etruscans and their Gallic allies. It was a decisive Roman victory, and the Etruscans, battered and weary, began to realize that resistance was futile. The Roman war machine was unstoppable, and the Etruscans, once the trendsetters of Italy, were being relegated to historical footnotes. So, how did the Etruscans go from influencers to the annexed? Well, it wasn't just about military might. The Romans were master tacticians, not just on the battlefield, but in the realm of culture. They were like cultural magpies, picking and choosing the best elements of Etruscan society and rebranding them as Roman. This cultural assimilation process was as slick as a used car salesman convincing you that rust is a feature, not a flaw. Take the Roman religion, for example. Much of it was a direct copy-paste job from the Etruscans. Those famed Roman gods, many of them were Etruscan imports with a new coat of paint. Even the practice of augury, interpreting the will of the gods by observing the flight of birds, was an Etruscan specialty that the Romans adopted with gusto. It's like they took the Etruscan spiritual playbook, slapped a Roman label on it, and called it a day. Architecture, too, was an area where the Etruscans left an indelible mark. Their innovative use of the arch and sophisticated urban planning were the blueprints for Roman cities. The Romans were like eager students, taking notes and applying these lessons to create the architectural wonders that would define their empire. But don't expect to find many footnotes crediting the Etruscans in Roman history books. Even in the realm of fashion, the Romans were taking cues from their Etruscan predecessors. The toga, that quintessential symbol of Roman citizenship, was actually an Etruscan invention. Yet, in the grand narrative of history, it's the Romans who get the credit for making it iconic. It's like the Etruscans were the unsung fashion designers behind the Roman runway. Economically, the Etruscans were absorbed into the Roman system, their wealth and resources appropriated to fuel Rome's ever-growing ambitions. The rich mineral deposits that had once filled Etruscan coffers now lined Roman purses. It was a hostile takeover that would make even the most aggressive modern corporate raider nod in approval. As the Romans expanded, the Etruscans became Roman citizens, their identity gradually dissolving into the melting pot of Roman culture. It was a process of cultural osmosis, where Etruscan traditions and innovations were absorbed and repackaged as Roman. The Etruscans, once masters of their domain, were now contributors to a larger Roman narrative, a narrative that often conveniently glossed over their contributions. Yet, despite their decline, the Etruscans left a legacy that continues to resonate. Their influence on Roman art, religion, and architecture was profound, and their contributions helped lay the foundation for what would become one of the greatest empires in history. The Etruscans may have been overshadowed by Rome, but their impact was as enduring as the arches they pioneered. As we leave the Etruscans in the capable, if somewhat imperial, hands of the Romans, remember, history is a mosaic, and the Etruscans were the vibrant tiles that added color and complexity to the grand design. Their story is a testament to the ebb and flow of civilizations, where innovation and influence can transcend even the most relentless tide of conquest. So, as we prepare to delve into the next chapter of our historical saga, keep in mind that the Etruscans were the unsung architects of Rome's grandeur, their legacy as enduring as the myths that surround them. We segue from the Etruscans' fading light into their enduring shadow. We find ourselves in a land where legacy lingers like the last notes of a symphony. The Etruscans, those unsung architects of Roman grandeur, are the ultimate proof that history isn't written by the victors alone. It's also scribbled in the margins by those who laid the groundwork. Their influence in Italy and beyond is like a whisper that refuses to fade, a testament to their lasting impact. Take modern Tuscany, for example. The very name is a nod to the Etruscan heartland, where rolling hills and vineyards echo the agricultural prowess of their ancestors. When you sip on a glass of Chianti, you're not just enjoying a fine wine. You're indulging in a tradition that the Etruscans practically had down to a science by the 7th century BCE. These ancient viticulturists were the original sommeliers, cultivating grapes with a sophistication that would make a modern-day wine snob blush with envy. But let's dive deeper than the wine glass. The Etruscan legacy in architecture is as solid as the arches they pioneered. Those magnificent Roman aqueducts and amphitheaters, they owe a substantial debt to Etruscan engineering. The Romans may have gotten the headline, but the Etruscans provided the blueprint. It's like giving credit for the iPhone without mentioning Alexander Graham Bell. There's a foundational ingenuity that often gets overlooked. In art, too, the Etruscans left their mark. Their pottery and frescoes, vibrant with life and detail, inspired Roman artists to go beyond simple storytelling and explore themes of daily life and mythology with nuance and flair. The famed Roman frescoes, those priceless windows into ancient Roman life, bear the unmistakable fingerprints of Etruscan influence. The Romans may have painted the pictures, but the Etruscans taught them how to hold the brush. As we shift our focus to modern archaeology, it's clear that the appetite for Etruscan discoveries is far from sated. The city of Tarquinia, once a bustling Etruscan hub, is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Here, archaeologists continue to unearth tombs adorned with frescoes that rival any modern art gallery. These tombs aren't just dusty relics. They're vibrant narratives of a culture that celebrated life and death with equal fervor. Every shovelful of dirt might reveal a new piece of the puzzle, and it's a race against time to uncover as much as possible before the relentless march of progress paves over these ancient secrets. And let's not forget the ongoing efforts to crack the Etruscan language, a linguistic enigma that would make even the most seasoned cryptologists sweat. Despite having over 10,000 inscriptions, including the epic one, 300-word Liber Linteus, which is essentially the war and peace of Etruscan texts, we still can't fully decipher their language. It's like having the complete works of Shakespeare in a code only partially cracked, a tantalizing glimpse into a world we can't quite reach. Modern scholars are like detectives piecing together a mystery, using clues from inscriptions to inch closer to understanding this ancient tongue. Imagine the revelations that could unfold once we finally tune into what the Etruscans were saying in their own words. But here's the kicker. Despite these rich contributions, the Etruscans remain largely in the shadows of the Roman Empire's towering legacy. It's a historical irony of epic proportions. They were the cultural and technological shoulders on which Rome stood, yet their story is often a footnote in the grand Roman narrative. It's like being the band who wrote the hit song, only to watch it become famous in someone else's voice. In the grand tapestry of history, the Etruscans remind us that legacy isn't always about who shouts the loudest or conquers the most. Sometimes it's about the quieter contributions that shape the world in profound ways. They were the unsung heroes of antiquity, whose innovations laid the foundation for future greatness. Their story is a poignant reminder that history is as much about the echoes of the past as it is about the voices that shout from the pages. So, as we draw the curtain on the Etruscans, let's remember that their legacy is as enduring as it is elusive. They may not have received the glory that came with empire building, but their influence resonates through the ages, reminding us that the contributions of the past are never truly lost. They are simply waiting to be rediscovered, one archaeological dig and linguistic breakthrough at a time. And as we continue to piece together the puzzle of the Etruscans, we find that history's true richness often lies in the shadows, where the unsung architects of greatness quietly reside. Down the cobblestone streets of 18th century Frankfurt, a young Johann Wolfgang von Goethe wandered, not yet the literary titan he would become, but a kid with a peculiar obsession: puppets. Yes, before Goethe was penning epics that would set the literary world ablaze, he was busy staging pint-sized dramas in his family's attic. This early fascination with puppetry supposedly ignited his passion for storytelling. It's as if he was training to be the Shakespeare of marionettes, a title I'm sure he never aspired to. But hey, everyone's got to start somewhere. Born in 1749 to a well-to-do family, his father an imperial counselor and his mother, well, pretty much the glue that held everything together, Goethe was surrounded by more books than most kids had toys. His father, Johann Caspar Goethe, was a man of means and education, which meant young Johann wasn't exactly your average street urchin. Instead, he was the kind of kid who had Latin drilled into him like it was the 18th century equivalent of learning to code. But little Johann had other ideas. His love for puppets might have seemed a bit offbeat, but they provided the perfect escape from the pressures of living up to his father's expectations. When he wasn't orchestrating puppet battles or crafting elaborate scripts for his miniature actors, Goethe was living the life of a young aristocrat, dabbling in the arts, sciences, and the occasional mischief. His family's wealth allowed him to explore his interests freely, but it wasn't all sunshine and marionette plays. The pressure to succeed was as palpable as the smell of ink on his father's important documents. The young Goethe was expected to follow in his father's bureaucratic footsteps, but the call of creativity was louder than the rustle of legal papers. By 1765, Goethe found himself at the University of Leipzig, ostensibly to study law, but let's be honest, he was more interested in poetry and the local cabarets. The university was a playground for the young and restless, and Goethe embraced it with the zeal of a kid in a candy store, if the candy store also offered beer and literary salons. It was here that Goethe met the likes of Adam Friedrich Esser, an artist who became his mentor and probably one of the few people who could keep Goethe's attention away from the taverns. Goethe's time at Leipzig was a blend of academic pursuits and youthful indiscretions. He wrote poetry, fell in and out of love, and somehow managed to squeeze in some legal studies in between. His grades, well, let's just say he wasn't exactly winning any awards for academic excellence, but his poetry, that was a different story. His early works began to show the promise of the literary genius he would become, even if his professors were more concerned about his attendance record than his rhyming couplets. But life at university wasn't all poetry and parties. Goethe faced the harsh reality of a serious illness, which forced him to return home for recovery. During this period, he indulged in alchemy and the occult, dabbling in the mystical arts like a wannabe wizard. This phase might sound like a subplot from a Harry Potter novel, but in Goethe's time, alchemy was as much about science as it was about sorcery. His experiments with alchemy weren't exactly groundbreaking, but they did reflect his insatiable curiosity, a trait that would serve him well in his literary career. After recovering, Goethe's academic journey took him to the University of Strasbourg in 1770. His father's hopes for a law degree still loomed large, but Goethe's heart was set on the arts. In Strasbourg, he met Johann Gottfried Herder, a philosopher who became a pivotal influence on his thinking. Herder introduced Goethe to the term Undrang, storm and stress, movement, a precursor to Romanticism, which emphasized emotion over rationalism, a perfect fit for Goethe's turbulent soul. Goethe's time in Strasbourg wasn't just about intellectual growth, it was also about good old-fashioned romance. He fell in love with Friederike Briand, a pastor's daughter, who became the muse for some of his early poetry. Their whirlwind romance was as intense as it was brief, ending with Goethe leaving behind a trail of poetic lamentations. Friederike was the first of many women who would inspire Goethe's literary works, setting the stage for his later reputation as a hopeless romantic, emphasis on the hopeless. By the time Goethe returned to Frankfurt in 1771, he had a law degree, but more importantly, he had the beginnings of a literary career. His early works, such as Götz von Berlichingen, captured the spirit of the Sturm und Drang movement and set his reputation alight. But beneath the literary success was a young man still grappling with the expectations of family and society, torn between the path laid out for him and the one he wanted to forge for himself. In a way, Goethe's early years were a balancing act between duty and desire, a theme that would resonate throughout his life and works. Puppets may have sparked his love for storytelling, but it was the struggles and triumphs of youth that fueled the fire of his literary genius. So, next time you see a puppet show, remember, you might just be watching the next Goethe in the making, or, just a really enthusiastic puppeteer. Either way, it's a reminder that even the greatest literary giants had humble, and sometimes hilarious, beginnings. With the ink barely dry on his law degree, Goethe felt the magnetic pull of Italy, the land of gelato and gladiators, or, as he called it, the rebirth of his soul. Now, if you're picturing a starry-eyed Goethe skipping through vineyards and reciting poetry to olive trees, hold that thought, because while Italy did indeed light up his creative circuits, his journey was more planes, trains, and automobiles than eat, pray, love. In the late 18th century, the Grand Tour was the European equivalent of a gap year, but with fewer selfies and more sketchbooks. It was a rite of passage for the cultured elite to soak up art, architecture, and maybe a bit of scandal along the way. Goethe set out in September 1786, sneaking out of Weimar under a pseudonym to avoid the endless demands of courtly life. Why the cloak and dagger, you ask? Well, it's hard to focus on frescoes when you're constantly being summoned to soirees. Goethe's Italian escapade was as much about escaping the shackles of his high-pressure life as it was about rediscovering his artistic mojo. And rediscover it he did, amid the ruins of Rome, no less. Imagine him standing before the Colosseum, a structure that had seen more drama than a soap opera marathon, feeling both small and infinite. This wasn't just a holiday. It was a pilgrimage to the heart of Western civilization. The ancient stones whispered stories of gods and gladiators, and Goethe listened carefully, his imagination running wild. Now, let's not romanticize it too much. For every moment of transcendent beauty, there were plenty of mundane hiccups. Take his diary entries, for instance. You'd think they'd be brimming with poetic musings on Roman sunsets, yet they often read like a traveler's guide to discomfort. In one entry, he bemoans the bedbugs. "These little beasts," he wrote, "are the true tyrants of Italy." Ah yes, nothing like a plague of pesky insects to remind you of life's harsher realities. The disparity between Goethe's grand inspirations and these trivial annoyances is nothing short of amusing. On one hand, Italy's sun-drenched landscapes inspired Iphigenia in Taurus, a lyrical play filled with mythical themes and profound insights into the human condition. On the other, you have Goethe, the literary genius, battling mosquitoes and lamenting the state of Italian inns. It's a delightful juxtaposition, akin to Shakespeare griping about the Wi-Fi in Verona. But let's get back to why Italy mattered so much for Goethe. Beyond the bedbugs and bad lodgings, this trip was a turning point. Goethe found himself reconnecting with the classical ideals that would shape his work for years. The Renaissance art he encountered reignited his appreciation for symmetry and balance, inspiring not just his literary endeavors, but also his sketches and scientific observations. Yes, Goethe was a polymath in every sense. He could wax poetic about the human soul and then turn around to calculate the angles of a Roman arch. The economic realities of travel in the 18th century were another factor that colored Goethe's experience. A trip like this wasn't cheap, and while Goethe was fortunate enough to have the financial backing of the Duke of Weimar, the cost of such a journey was significant. This wasn't just a jaunt to the Mediterranean. It was an investment in culture and education. Think of it as the ultimate Kickstarter campaign for the arts, with Goethe's talent as the reward. Politically, Italy was a patchwork of city-states, each with its own quirks and rulers. Goethe navigated this complex landscape like a seasoned diplomat, using his charm and intellect to gain access to the minds and masterpieces that would broaden his horizons. He mingled with the intellectual elite of Rome and Florence, absorbing their ideas like a sponge, all while dodging any obligations that might tether him back to the duties he left behind in Weimar. Yet, for all his adventures, Goethe couldn't completely escape the tug of his German roots. His letters home were a mix of excitement and longing, a reminder that even the most epic journeys have their moments of homesickness. But then again, who wouldn't miss the comforts of home when faced with the less-than-appetizing reality of 18th-century Italian cuisine. Goethe's culinary critiques make one wonder if his greatest inspiration came not from the Sistine Chapel, but from a decent bratwurst. So, what do we take away from Goethe's Italian escapade? It's a reminder that even the most illustrious figures in history were not immune to life's little annoyances. The Grand Tour was both an artistic awakening and a lesson in humility, a testament to the fact that genius often operates alongside the mundane. Goethe's journey through Italy highlights the beauty of contrasts, the highs of creative inspiration tempered by the lows of travel mishaps. As Goethe eventually made his way back to Germany, his Italian experience lingered in his work and his soul. Italy had given him more than just stories. It had provided him with a fresh lens through which to view the world. And while he returned to the demands of Weimar with renewed vigor, the bedbug battling, sun-soaked poet remained forever changed by his time in the land of pasta and passion. It was as if he had discovered a new layer of himself amidst the ruins, a layer that would continue to resonate through his writing long after the ink dried on his travel diaries. In our next episode, we'll see how this newfound perspective influenced Goethe's return to Germany and the subsequent transformation in his work. But for now, let's leave him wandering the cobbled streets of Rome, a man reborn, with a head full of dreams and a few bites on his arms to show for it. As Goethe strolled back into the cobblestone-lined embrace of Weimar, fresh from his Italian adventure, he didn't just bring back a suitcase full of sketches and a sun-kissed glow. Nope, he returned with a renewed zest for life and a head brimming with ideas. Now, you might think that after such a grand tour, our man Johann would settle into a quiet life of reflection. That's where you'd be wrong. If anything, his days were about to get busier than a squirrel in a nut factory. Welcome to Weimar, folks, where Goethe wasn't just the resident poet laureate, but a veritable Swiss Army knife of talents. Here, he wore more hats than your average haberdasher. Statesman, scientist, writer. Goethe juggled them all with the finesse of a circus performer who's misplaced the safety net. The Duke of Saxe-Weimar, Karl August, had Goethe on speed dial. If 18th century people had phones, that is. Goethe was his right-hand man, tasked with everything from economic reform to overseeing the construction of roads. Talk about multitasking. Now, you might be wondering how a literary genius like Goethe wound up knee-deep in state affairs. Well, it turns out that being a polymath comes with its perks, but also a fair share of paperwork. Goethe's influence in Weimar wasn't just limited to poetry readings and philosophical debates in candlelit salons. He was elbow-deep in the gritty realities of governance, from improving the local economy to dabbling in urban planning. Think of him as a cross between a Renaissance man and a city planner with a penchant for quills. But it wasn't all bureaucratic drudgery. Enter Friedrich Schiller, a fellow wordsmith and kindred spirit who would forever change Goethe's life. Their friendship was like a literary bromance for the ages, a meeting of minds that spawned a collaboration as powerful as Lennon and McCartney, but with more quills and fewer guitars. Schiller, with his fiery Sturm und Drang roots, was just the spark Goethe needed to rekindle his creative flame. The two met in 1794, and their friendship was built on a foundation of mutual respect and intellectual banter. Goethe was the elder statesman of German literature, while Schiller was the passionate up-and-comer, full of revolutionary zeal. They challenged each other, debated fiercely, and pushed the boundaries of what was possible in literature. Their correspondence alone is a masterclass in wit and wisdom, filled with discussions on everything from aesthetics to morality. Together, they were the dynamic duo behind the Weimar classicism movement, which sought to harmonize the ideals of Enlightenment rationalism with the emotional depth of Romanticism. This literary power couple redefined the German literary landscape, influencing generations of writers to come. It was like the Avengers of the literary world, but with more existential angst and fewer spandex suits. And let's not forget Goethe's foray into science, which was, well, a bit unorthodox. While he was penning timeless classics, he was also busy formulating theories that left many scratching their heads. Take his color theory, for example. Published in 1810, Theory of Colors was Goethe's attempt to dethrone Newton's ideas on optics. Bold, right? Goethe argued that color was perceived subjectively and was influenced by emotions, a concept that didn't exactly win over the scientific community. Even Albert Einstein, that paragon of scientific thought, found Goethe's theories a bit out there. But let's give Goethe some credit. He was, after all, more about the aesthetics of color than the math behind it. His work may not have revolutionized science, but it did give artists and philosophers plenty to ponder. His emphasis on the subjective experience of color influenced figures like Wassily Kandinsky, proving that even a misstep can lead to fascinating pathways. Despite his scientific eccentricities, Goethe's time in Weimar was marked by a relentless pursuit of knowledge. He saw himself not just as a creator of art, but as a seeker of truth, exploring the vast intersection of science, philosophy, and aesthetics. It's as if Leonardo da Vinci, Steve Jobs, and Shakespeare had a love child, and his name was Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. But let's step back and view the bigger picture. Weimar, under Goethe's influence, became a cultural epicenter, a beacon of intellectualism in a world teetering on the brink of modernity. The city attracted thinkers, artists, and dreamers, a salon of ideas that rivaled the great cultural capitals of Europe. Goethe's fingerprints were everywhere, from the policies that shaped the duchy to the literary works that filled its libraries. The economy of Weimar wasn't exactly the bustling hub of trade like Hamburg or Frankfurt, but Goethe's reforms helped stabilize it. Under his watchful eye, agriculture improved, infrastructure developed, and the arts flourished. Sure, there were setbacks, like the time Goethe's attempt to introduce English sheep to improve the wool industry ended in bleeding disaster. But hey, not every genius idea hits it out of the park. So, what do we gather from Goethe's Weimar years? That genius often comes with a side of chaos. Goethe's life was a whirlwind of creativity, responsibility, and discovery, a testament to the human capacity for multitasking on a grand scale. His friendship with Schiller added the spark of collaboration, proving that even the greatest minds need a partner in crime. And while his scientific pursuits might not have been groundbreaking, they underscored his insatiable curiosity and willingness to ask the questions others dared not. As we zoom out, it's clear that Goethe was more than just a literary icon. He was a man of contradictions, a figure of immense influence who nonetheless grappled with the same uncertainties and ambitions we all face. His time in Weimar was a microcosm of his life, complex, challenging, and brilliantly colorful, even if his theories on color left a few eyebrows raised. Stay tuned for more of Goethe's life, where we'll delve into his continued literary achievements and the legacy he left behind. But for now, let's leave him in Weimar, man of many talents, a friend to Schiller, and a dreamer who dared to think outside the spectrum. As Goethe nestled into the heart of Weimar, the world around him was shifting like a kaleidoscope, and he was right at the center of it, spinning tales and truths with equal aplomb. By the time he reached his later years, Goethe had achieved something akin to celebrity status, the 18th century equivalent of a rock star, if rock stars wore wigs and wrote in quills. He was adored, parodied, and everything in between, a walking paradox wrapped in the finery of a cultural icon. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the enigma of Goethe's fame. The man was a literary colossus, standing astride the cultural landscape like a titan. But unlike today's celebrities, he wasn't dodging paparazzi or signing autographs with a Sharpie. No, Goethe's world was one of letters, not just the kind that formed words, but the literal kind that filled mailbags. His correspondence was legendary, with over 20,000 letters exchanged throughout his lifetime. Imagine that, a flood of paper cascading through Europe, each missive a slice of Goethe's brain on paper. It's no wonder he had a writer's cramp that could rival any modern author's carpal tunnel. In the midst of all this epistolary prowess, Goethe was crafting what would become his magnum opus, Faust. Now, Faust was no ordinary tale. It was an epic that held a mirror up to humanity's deepest desires and darkest fears, blending mythological grandeur with biting social commentary. This wasn't just a book, it was a phenomenon. Think of it as a literary blockbuster that had people lining up, not outside a theater, but at their local bookbinders. When Faust, Part 1, hit the scene in 1808, it was as if the world collectively held its breath. The anticipation was palpable, readers eagerly waiting to see just how far Faust would go in his pact with Mephistopheles. But let's not get too swept up in the drama without grounding ourselves in the practicalities. Creating Faust was no small feat. This was a project that spanned over 6 decades of Goethe's life, a testament to both his dedication and his penchant for procrastination. The seeds of Faust were sown in the Sturm und Drang era, and as Goethe matured, so did his masterpiece. It evolved alongside him, reflecting the changing tides of his thought and the world around him. While the myth of Goethe, the solitary genius scribbling away by candlelight, is a romantic notion, the reality was far more mundane. The truth is, Goethe's writing process was punctuated by the interruptions of daily life, from managing Weimar's affairs to maintaining his extensive network of correspondences. His workspace was less a monastic retreat and more a bustling hub of activity, with aides, friends, and fellow intellectuals constantly dropping by. Picture a literary salon, but with more ink stains and fewer powdered wigs. The economic context of Goethe's time played a crucial role in his work's reception. The Napoleonic Wars had turned Europe into a smouldering chessboard, with nations maneuvering for power and prestige. Amidst this turmoil, Faust offered a form of escapism, a journey into the metaphysical that resonated with a public weary of political strife. It was a story that transcended borders, tapping into universal themes of ambition, redemption, and the human condition. Politically, Goethe's status afforded him a unique vantage point. As a confidant of the Duke of Saxe-Weimar, he witnessed the machinations of power up close. This insider perspective seeped into Faust, infusing the text with layers of complexity that scholars would spend centuries unraveling. Yet, for all its depth, Faust was also approachable, a tale that could be enjoyed by the learned and the layperson alike. It was the kind of story that invited readers to ponder the eternal question, what would you trade for ultimate knowledge and power? As Goethe's fame grew, so did the mythos surrounding him. He became a fixture in the cultural consciousness, his image immortalized in portraits and parodies alike. Satirical prints of the time often poked fun at his lofty status, depicting him as a puppet master pulling the strings of Weimar's intellectual elite. It was a playful jab at his influence, a nod to the young Goethe's early love of marionettes. Yet, beneath the veneer of celebrity, Goethe remained a man of profound introspection. He was acutely aware of the gap between the persona and the person, a theme he explored with finesse in his later works. His writing was both a refuge and a mirror, a space where he could wrestle with his own doubts and desires. On the surface, he was the sage of Weimar, dispensing wisdom with the ease of a seasoned philosopher. But beneath the surface, he was still the same restless soul, forever seeking, forever questioning. The economic realities of Goethe's later years were marked by a Germany in flux. The Holy Roman Empire had crumbled, and the Congress of Vienna in 1815 had redrawn the map of Europe. Amidst these seismic shifts, Goethe's work offered a sense of continuity, a reminder of the enduring power of art to illuminate the human spirit. It's no wonder that his contemporaries looked to him for guidance in a rapidly changing world. In a sense, Goethe's life was a testament to the power of reinvention. He was a man who refused to be confined by the expectations of his time, constantly redefining what it meant to be an artist, a thinker, and a human being. His legacy was one of transformation, not just of his own work, but of the cultural landscape he helped shape. As we continue our exploration of Goethe's life, we'll delve deeper into the impact of Faust and the lasting influence of this literary giant. But for now, let's leave Goethe in the throes of creation, a man whose pen was as mighty as any sword, crafting a tale that would echo through the ages, capturing the hearts and minds of generations to come. As Goethe's ink flowed and his words danced across the page, Faust became a living testament to the complexities of human ambition, a saga of someone who dared to shake hands with the devil in pursuit of knowledge and power. But let's not pretend that Goethe's life was all highbrow musings and philosophical debates. The man had his fair share of quirks and eccentricities, the kind that make you shake your head and smile at the same time. Take, for instance, the strange phenomenon of fans asking Goethe for souvenirs. Nope, not a lock of hair or an autograph, but something truly bizarre, his old socks. You see, Goethe was so revered that people wanted a tangible piece of him, even if it meant a pair of well-worn stockings. In today's terms, it would be like someone clamoring for a celebrity's used gym socks, a testament to the absurd lengths fandom can reach. But Goethe, ever the gentleman, obliged on occasion, perhaps with a bemused chuckle at the peculiar nature of celebrity worship. Even as Goethe embraced his role as Germany's literary patriarch, his life continued to intertwine the sublime with the ridiculous. By the time of his death in 1832, Goethe had amassed a body of work so profound, it was as if he'd woven a tapestry of the human condition itself. His writing spanned the gamut from lyrical poetry to scientific treatises, with each piece a reflection of his insatiable curiosity and boundless intellect. But what truly cemented Goethe's legacy wasn't just the sheer volume of his work. It was the way he captured the zeitgeist of an era poised on the brink of modernity. Faust and his other masterpieces addressed the eternal struggle between enlightenment and desire, reason and passion. His characters, archetypes of humanity itself, spoke to the core of what it means to be alive, wrestling with questions that continue to resonate in a world defined by rapid change and uncertainty. Yet, Goethe wasn't just a man of letters. He was a cultural force, shaping the intellectual landscape of Europe. His influence reached far beyond the borders of Germany, inspiring romantic poets, philosophers, and artists from all corners of the continent. In England, figures like Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Lord Byron took cues from Goethe's exploration of the human psyche, while in France, his themes of longing and existential angst found a kindred spirit in writers like Victor Hugo and Honoré de Balzac. Economically, Goethe's works became a lucrative enterprise, not just for him, but for the burgeoning publishing industry. The sheer demand for his books turned printing presses into veritable gold mines, feeding the appetites of a reading public hungry for stories that reflected their own desires and dilemmas. It's worth noting that, during Goethe's lifetime, the cost of a well-bound edition of Faust could easily match a skilled craftsman's weekly wage. Yet, people paid gladly, eager to partake in the literary feast he had laid out. Politically, Goethe's legacy was equally significant. He lived through the Napoleonic Wars and the Congress of Vienna, periods of upheaval that redefined the European map. In the face of such tumult, his works offered a beacon of intellectual stability, affirming the power of art to transcend political and geographical divides. Goethe's embrace of cosmopolitanism, his belief in the shared human experience, was both a reflection of and a challenge to the nationalistic fervor that would sweep across Europe in the 19th century. But let's not pretend Goethe's journey was a seamless ascent to literary Olympus. Even he faced criticism and controversy. His novel, The Sorrows of Young Werther, for instance, was both a sensation and a scandal, sparking a wave of copycat suicides among young romantics who saw in Werther's despair a mirror of their own existential woes. Goethe himself grew weary of the attention, lamenting the way his fictional creation had taken on a life of its own, a cautionary tale of how art can escape its creator's control. And then there was the matter of Goethe's scientific pursuits. While his color theory might not have dethroned Newton, it did lay the groundwork for discussions on perception and aesthetics that continue to this day. His botanical studies, too, revealed a keen observational eye, even if his conclusions occasionally wandered into the realm of the speculative. In the grand tapestry of his life, these scientific forays were threads that, while perhaps less celebrated, nonetheless contributed to the richness of his legacy. Goethe's life was one of contrast, a fusion of high art and human idiosyncrasy. He was a man who could pen a sonnet by morning and debate urban planning by afternoon, who navigated the corridors of power with the same grace he applied to a stanza of poetry. His story is a reminder that even the loftiest figures are, at their core, as human as the rest of us, prone to quirks, driven by passions, and ever in pursuit of meaning. Reflecting on Goethe's legacy, one can't help but marvel at the breadth of his impact. His works remain timeless, their themes as relevant today as they were 2 centuries ago. In many ways, Goethe was ahead of his time, a visionary who anticipated the complexities of the modern world. His exploration of the human condition continues to inspire, offering solace and insight to those grappling with the same age-old questions of identity, purpose, and connection. So, as we wrap up our exploration of Goethe's life, let's consider the lessons his story imparts. Here was a man who embraced the full spectrum of human experience, who refused to be pigeonholed into a single role or discipline. Goethe's life was a testament to the power of curiosity and creativity, to the idea that the pursuit of knowledge and beauty is a lifelong journey. His legacy endures, not only in the pages of his books, but in the hearts and minds of those who dare to dream, question, and create. In the end, Goethe's real story is as compelling as any of his fictional creations, a blend of brilliance and whimsy that continues to captivate and inspire. Whether you're a fan of his poetry, a student of his scientific musings, or simply someone who appreciates a good yarn, there's something in Goethe's life that speaks to us all. So here's to Goethe, the literary giant with a penchant for puppets, a man whose legacy reminds us that the line between art and life is as thin as a well-written page. In the grand tapestry of history, there's nothing quite like a good old-fashioned family feud to spice things up, and the Abbasid Caliphate's origin story has all the drama you could wish for. It's essentially Game of Thrones, the Caliphate edition, minus the dragons, and plus some serious political maneuvering. Welcome to the 8th century, where the desert heat was rivaled only by the fiery ambitions of the Abbasid family. Imagine the Umayyad Caliphate, ruling with an iron fist from their capital in Damascus. They were the top dogs, having spread their empire across a vast territory that reached from Spain to Persia. But alas, power has a way of making enemies, especially when you're more interested in keeping the elite happy than, say, the average Joe, or in this case, the average Ali. Enter the Abbasids, who were not just any disgruntled relatives, but descended from the Prophet Muhammad's uncle, Abbas. They had a pedigree that made them think, we deserve a shot at this caliphate business. Now, this rising tension wasn't just about family squabbles. It was fueled by a sense of dissatisfaction that was simmering across the empire. Non-Arab Muslims, known as Mawali, felt like second-class citizens, and the Shia Muslims were still fuming over the whole Ali got shafted saga. The Abbasids tapped into this bubbling resentment with the finesse of a modern political strategist. Their slogan could have been, fairness for all, or at least more fairness than those Umayyads. Things came to a head in 750 CE at the Battle of the Zab. Picture two armies clashing by the Zab River, located in present-day northern Iraq, with one side shouting, out with the old, in with the gold, or something along those lines. The Abbasids, led by Abu al-Abbas as-Zafar, went toe-to-toe with the Umayyad forces, and let's just say it wasn't a good day for the incumbents. The Abbasids emerged victorious, and with that, the Umayyad Caliphate was as obsolete as a flip phone in the age of smartphones. The victory wasn't just some minor regime change, it was a seismic shift. The Umayyads were practically erased from the Middle Eastern power map, with the exception of one survivor who fled to Spain and set up a rival emirate there. The Abbasid win was like the underdog story of the century, complete with its own mic drop moment. They didn't just claim the throne, they moved the capital to Baghdad, a city that would soon become the envy of the world as the heart of the Islamic Golden Age. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The rise of the Abbasids wasn't all about justice and enlightenment. The new bosses were indeed same as the old bosses, just with a different set of priorities and a penchant for Persian culture. The shift in power was as much about pragmatism as it was about ideology. They knew they needed a broader base of support, so they played the inclusivity card. Well, as much as one could in the medieval world. Economically, this transition was like upgrading from a horse-drawn cart to a sleek chariot. The Abbasids were savvy, leveraging trade routes that connected the East and West. They understood that money talks, and under their rule, Baghdad became a bustling hub of commerce, a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and goods. Think of it as the world's first global city, where you could hear a smorgasbord of languages while sipping on some exotic tea from the Far East. Now, let's bust a myth or two. While the Abbasids are often painted as enlightened rulers who ushered in a golden age of knowledge and culture, it wasn't all peaceful libraries and scholarly debates. Power struggles, betrayals, and the occasional beheading were par for the course. Az-Zafar, whose nickname literally means the bloodshedder, didn't earn that moniker by handing out daisies. Once in power, he made sure any Umayyad who posed a threat was, well, no longer a threat. Let's just say his approach to governance was as sharp as a scimitar. Despite the bloodshed, the Abbasids changed the political landscape. They embraced Persian administrative practices, which helped stabilize and govern their sprawling empire more effectively than their predecessors. This was no small feat, considering they had to manage diverse populations spread over continents. The Abbasids were the real-life version of a startup that disrupted the status quo, bringing in innovation while keeping a close eye on anyone who might challenge their authority. So here we are, at the dawn of an era that would see the Abbasid Caliphate become a beacon of culture and learning. But as with any great story, there's more to it than meets the eye. The Abbasids staked their claim not just with spears and swords, but with shrewd politics and a vision that would shape the Islamic world for centuries. They weren't just the new bosses. They were the ones who set the stage for an age that would indeed be golden, even if getting there was a bit more complicated than the fairy tales would have you believe. Speaking of golden ages, let's dive into the Abbasids' crowning jewel, Baghdad. Imagine a city so dazzling that even the most jaded medieval traveler would be left slack-jawed. The Abbasids didn't just want a capital, they wanted a statement. And what a statement Baghdad was. Founded in 762 CE by Caliph Al-Mansur, it was a city built from scratch, a blank canvas upon which the Abbasids painted their vision of imperial grandeur. Picture this, an enormous circular city, perfectly designed and meticulously planned, all for the modest sum of 8 million silver dirhams. Adjusted for inflation, that's a price tag that would make even the most deep-pocketed of modern billionaires blink. Now, why go to all this trouble to build a new capital? Well, Al-Mansur was nothing if not savvy. By situating Baghdad along the Tigris River, he tapped into the arteries of trade that flowed from the east and west like a lifeline of prosperity. With the Silk Road to the north and sea routes to the south, Baghdad was poised to become the center of the universe, or at least the medieval version of it. Traders, scholars, and adventurers from every corner of the known world streamed into the city, bringing with them not just goods but ideas, cultures, and sometimes a healthy dose of intrigue. And if you think the city's layout was just for show, think again. The circular design wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it was a strategic masterstroke. At the heart of Baghdad stood the Golden Gate Palace, surrounded by the Grand Mosque and government buildings, all encased within a series of walls that would make any medieval defender proud. This wasn't just urban planning, it was urban fortification. The design screamed, come for the commerce, stay for the security. But the Abbasids didn't stop at mere architecture. They knew that to keep an empire running smoothly, they had to keep the populace satisfied, or more accurately, too engaged to entertain thoughts of rebellion. Enter the Abbasid economic strategy, a blend of taxation and diplomacy that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. Taxation was a fine art, and the Abbasids wielded it with precision. They levied taxes on land, trade, and non-Muslim populations, all while ensuring that the system was efficient enough to keep the coffers full without sparking too much unrest. The real genius, however, lay in their ability to maintain a delicate balance of power. The Abbasids were masters at playing different factions against each other, ensuring that no single group grew too powerful. They offered lucrative positions to Persian bureaucrats, who brought with them administrative savvy that was second to none. Meanwhile, they embraced the Mawali, the non-Arab Muslims who had been sidelined by the Umayyads, thus securing their loyalty. It was a dance of diplomacy and manipulation, and the Abbasids performed it with the grace of a seasoned ballroom dancer. Baghdad wasn't just a hub for trade. It was a melting pot of cultures, a place where East met West in a vibrant tapestry of human exchange. The city attracted scholars, scientists, and thinkers like moths to a flame, leading to an intellectual renaissance that would echo through the ages. The House of Wisdom, established by Caliph Harun al-Rashid, became the beating heart of this intellectual fervor, a place where Greek, Persian, Indian, and Arabic knowledge converged and flourished. Here, scholars translated the works of Aristotle, Plato, and Hippocrates into Arabic, preserving them for future generations and laying the groundwork for what we now call the Renaissance. Before we romanticize Baghdad as some kind of utopia of learning and culture, let's inject a dose of reality. The city, like any bustling metropolis, had its fair share of challenges. Overcrowding, sanitation issues, and social tensions were as much a part of Baghdad's story as its golden domes and lush gardens. And while the Abbasids were adept at keeping the peace, they weren't above quashing dissent with an iron fist when the situation called for it. After all, even the most enlightened ruler knows that sometimes you need a little more than diplomacy to keep things running smoothly. Economically, the Abbasids were the Bill Gates of their time, leveraging their resources to create a system that was as profitable as it was innovative. They introduced the use of checks, known as sack, which allowed merchants to conduct trade without carrying around chests of gold and silver. This early form of banking was revolutionary, enabling a fluidity of commerce that was unprecedented in the medieval world. It was a system that not only filled the empire's coffers, but also facilitated the exchange of goods and ideas across vast distances, knitting together a diverse and sprawling empire. Let's not forget the human factor in all this. The Abbasids were keenly aware that a happy populace was a productive one. Public works projects, from roads to irrigation systems, were undertaken with an eye toward improving the lives of ordinary citizens. And while these projects served the practical purpose of bolstering the economy, they also acted as a form of social engineering, creating jobs and fostering a sense of unity and common purpose. In the grand game of empire building, the Abbasids played their hand with a mix of cunning, innovation, and a touch of ruthlessness. They knew that to maintain power, they had to do more than just conquer territories. They had to win hearts and minds. And so, through a blend of economic savvy, cultural patronage, and strategic governance, they turned Baghdad into the Manhattan of the 8th century, a city that truly never slept, buzzing with the energy of 1,000 different voices and ideas. But of course, no empire is without its cracks, and the Abbasids were no exception. As we look ahead to the next chapter in their story, we'll see how the seeds of their eventual decline were sown even as they stood at the height of their power. For now, though, let's leave Baghdad basking in the glow of its golden age, a beacon of culture and commerce that would shine brightly for centuries to come. As Baghdad basked in its golden glow, let's turn our gaze to the intellectual fireworks that lit up the sky during the Abbasid era. Welcome to the Islamic Golden Age, a time when the House of Wisdom in Baghdad wasn't just a fancy name, but the medieval version of Silicon Valley, minus the overpriced lattes and tech bro culture. The Abbasids were the ultimate academic party hosts, inviting the brightest minds from across the empire to what was essentially a centuries-long TED conference. At the heart of this intellectual jamboree was the House of Wisdom, established in the early 9th century by Caliph Harun al-Rashid and expanded by his son, Al-Mamun. This wasn't just a library. It was an intellectual buffet where scholars from diverse backgrounds, Greek, Persian, Indian, and Arab, served up a feast of knowledge that would nourish generations. Consider this. While Europe was busy throwing its Dark Ages-themed party, the Abbasids were translating, preserving, and expanding upon the works of Aristotle, Plato, and other Greek heavyweights. Imagine a world where the texts of Archimedes, Ptolemy, and Hippocrates were as common as cat videos are today. The translation movement was massive, fueled by an insatiable thirst for knowledge and a budget that could rival a Hollywood blockbuster. Caliph Al-Mamun even sent emissaries to the Byzantine Empire to acquire manuscripts, proving that if you want the best, sometimes you have to shop abroad. But let's not get too romantic about this intellectual renaissance. The reality was a bit grittier. Translating Greek texts into Arabic was no walk in the park. It required linguistic gymnastics that would make a polyglot sweat. Scholars had to grapple with complex concepts and technical jargon, often inventing new Arabic terms to capture the essence of Greek philosophy and science. It was a battle of wits and words, a testament to the scholarly dedication that made the Golden Age not just a flash in the pan, but a lasting beacon of knowledge. Now, speaking of intellectual heroes, let's chat about a guy who gave math the makeover it desperately needed. Al-Khwarizmi. If you've ever struggled with algebra, you can thank or curse this 9th century Persian polymath. His book, Al-Kitab al-Muqtasar fi Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala, was a game-changer, offering a systematic solution to linear and quadratic equations. Before Al-Khwarizmi, algebra was like a cryptic monster lurking in the shadows of academia, scaring off all but the bravest mathematicians. But he turned it into a tool, a superhero of sorts, that could solve real-world problems like inheritance disputes and trade calculations. And let's not forget those catchy algebraic terms we love so much today. Al-Khwarizmi's work introduced the world to al-Jabr, restoration, and al-Muqabala, balancing, terms without which high school math teachers everywhere would be out of a job. His influence was so profound that the term algorithm is derived from his name, a fitting tribute to the man who helped turn mathematics into a universal language. But why stop at math? The Abbasids were all about blending ideas into a smooth cultural smoothie. They didn't just borrow from the Greeks. They dipped into Persian, Indian, and even Chinese knowledge, creating a rich tapestry of discovery. Astronomy, medicine, chemistry, these were the fields where Abbasid scholars shone brightly. Al-Razi, a Persian polymath, penned the comprehensive book on medicine, a medical encyclopedia that would become a standard reference for centuries. Meanwhile, Al-Battani, an astronomer and mathematician, refined the solar year, calculating it as 365 days, 5 hours, 46 minutes, and 24 seconds, an accuracy that would impress even modern astronomers. Now, here's the kicker. While the West would later romanticize this period as an age of enlightenment, the reality was a bit more complex. The Abbasids weren't hosting intellectual salons purely out of benevolence. Knowledge was power, and the Abbasids understood that better than anyone. Investing in scholars and their work, they were investing in the empire's future, a future where technology, science, and innovation would keep their economy humming and their enemies at bay. And how did they afford this intellectual extravaganza? Economic savvy, my friends. The Abbasids were the Warren Buffetts of the medieval world, leveraging trade routes that stretched from the Mediterranean to China. The Silk Road was their stock market, and they played it like seasoned investors, ensuring that wealth flowed into Baghdad, where it could be used to fund their scholarly pursuits. But behind the glittering facade of the Golden Age, there were darker undertones. Power struggles and political intrigue were as much a part of the Abbasid narrative as their scientific achievements. The caliphs were engaged in a constant game of thrones, balancing the interests of various factions within the empire while keeping an eye on external threats. It was a high-stakes chess match, with knowledge serving as both a weapon and a shield. Yet, the Abbasids managed to keep the intellectual fire burning, even as they navigated the treacherous waters of politics. Their ability to blend cultures and ideas wasn't just a testament to their open-mindedness. It was a survival strategy. By embracing the best of what the world had to offer, they created an empire that was resilient, innovative, and for a time, unmatched in its intellectual and cultural achievements. So, as we marvel at the Abbasids' legacy, let's remember that this golden age was not just about grand libraries and scholarly debates. It was a complex tapestry of ambition, innovation, and yes, a fair share of intrigue. The Abbasids were the ultimate curators of knowledge, weaving a cultural fabric that would withstand the test of time, even as the empire itself faced the inevitable ebb and flow of history. And while their story is far from over, for now, let's leave it here, with the House of Wisdom standing as a testament to the power of knowledge, and the savvy rulers who knew how to wield it. As the House of Wisdom stood tall amidst the bustling cityscape of Baghdad, drawing scholars like moths to a scholarly flame, let's shift gears and take a peek behind the ornate curtains of Abbasid society. We've all heard the enchanting tales of the Arabian Nights, where caliphs lounged in opulent palaces, surrounded by fountains and fragrant gardens. But was life in the Abbasid Caliphate really one endless episode of lifestyles of the rich and famous? Spoiler alert, not quite. First, let's tackle the myth of endless luxury. Sure, the caliphs had their fair share of palatial grandeur, but running an empire isn't just about opulent banquets and fluffy cushions. Picture a medieval metropolis crammed with people, goods, and yes, quite a bit of filth. Baghdad was the beating heart of the empire, but it also had its fair share of clogged arteries. Sanitation wasn't exactly top-notch. Think more muddy streets and chamber pots than pristine gardens and marble walkways. The reality of Abbasid society was a cacophony of sights and smells. With an estimated population of over 800,000 in the 9th century, Baghdad was the New York City of its time, minus the skyscrapers, but with a healthy dose of chaos. Imagine navigating through narrow streets bustling with merchants hawking spices, fabrics, and everything in between, while trying to dodge the occasional, waste disposal from a window above. Let's just say that the perfume industry likely had a booming trade. Now, about those palaces. The caliphs did indeed reside in lavish surroundings, but maintaining such splendor was a logistical and financial nightmare. Think about it. Managing a court that could rival a small city in size required an army of servants, artisans, and bureaucrats. The logistics of feeding, clothing, and entertaining this entourage could turn even the most robust treasury into a sieve. It's no wonder that the Caliphate's finances sometimes resembled a particularly precarious game of Jenga. And while we're busting myths, let's not forget that not all caliphs were the enlightened rulers of legend. For every Harun al-Rashid, there was a caliph more interested in power plays than poetry. The court was often a snake pit of intrigue, where political maneuvering could be as deadly as any battlefield. The caliphs had to be as adept with their wits as with their swords, navigating alliances and betrayals with the finesse of a tightrope walker over a pit of vipers. Yet, amid this blend of opulence and chaos, the Abbasids were masters of spin. They cultivated an image of a golden age, nurturing arts and sciences while maintaining control. But beneath the glittering surface, the empire faced cracks that would eventually widen into chasms. The caliph's opulent lifestyle came at a cost, not just financial, but also political. As the empire expanded, so did the complexity of its administration, and the caliphs found themselves juggling a dizzying array of challenges. From revolts in distant provinces to the ever-present threat of rival factions, ruling the Abbasid Caliphate was like playing a never-ending game of geopolitical whack-a-mole. Moreover, the economic engine that powered the empire started to sputter. The Silk Road, once a river of gold, began to dry up as new trade routes emerged, bypassing the once crucial Baghdad. The Abbasids faced increasing difficulty maintaining the economic dominance they once enjoyed. Inflation reared its ugly head, and the once stable currency of the Caliphate began to lose its luster. By the 10th century, the dinar had depreciated, and the Abbasids struggled to keep their fiscal house in order. The empire's internal stability was further tested by the rise of powerful military leaders, the Turkish mercenaries known as the Mamluks. Initially employed to bolster the caliph's armies, these warriors soon realized they held the real power. By the mid-9th century, the caliphs were more figureheads than rulers, with the Mamluks pulling the strings from behind the scenes. The political landscape of the Abbasid Caliphate was transforming, and not in the caliph's favor. All these factors contributed to the empire's gradual decline, a slow unraveling of what was once the jewel of the Islamic world. Yet, even as the Abbasids' political power waned, their cultural and intellectual legacy endured. The knowledge preserved and expanded during their reign continued to illuminate the path for future generations. The House of Wisdom may have been a relic of a bygone era, but its impact was a beacon that guided the world through the dark corridors of time. So, as we peer into the twilight of the Abbasid Caliphate, let's remember that history is rarely as simple as it seems. The Abbasids' golden age was a complex tapestry woven from threads of triumph and turmoil, opulence and decay. And while the empire's shine may have dulled over time, its influence remains etched in the annals of history, a testament to an age where knowledge and power danced a delicate waltz across the stage of civilization. In our next chapter, we'll explore how the Abbasids navigated the stormy seas of decline, struggling to maintain their grip on power even as the tides of history shifted beneath their feet. But for now, let's leave the caliphs contemplating the state of their empire, their palaces echoing with the whispers of 1,001 tales, each more fantastical than the last. As the curtain falls on this act of history, the stage is set for the next, where the echoes of the past will continue to shape the future in ways we have yet to discover. As the curtain rises on the Abbasid Caliphate's twilight years, we find ourselves at the brink of a saga where political intrigue makes Game of Thrones look like a playground scuffle. Let's dive into the drama of decline, wherein fighting, invasions, and assassinations turned an empire into a cautionary tale. Strap in, folks, because this isn't your average bedtime story. It's a historical roller coaster with more twists than a pretzel factory. First up, let's talk about the infighting. You might think that the Abbasid Caliphate, with its grandiose capital and intellectual prowess, would have a united front. But alas, the caliphs were as prone to sibling rivalry as any reality TV family. By the late 9th century, The caliphs were more like figureheads than actual rulers, the real power players, the military generals and their personal armies, each with their own agenda. Ever heard the saying, "Too many cooks spoil the broth"? Well, imagine those cooks armed and plotting coups. Not exactly a recipe for stability. Enter the Buyids, a Persian dynasty that saw the Abbasids' internal squabbles as the perfect opportunity to swoop in and snag power. By 945 C, the Buyids had effectively taken control of Baghdad, leaving the caliphs to play puppet while they pulled the strings. It's like letting your kid brother hold the remote while you decide what to watch. Frustrating and ultimately futile. The Caliphate's authority was reduced to a ceremonial role, a shadow of its former self. But wait, there's more. The caliphs weren't just battling internal foes, they also had to fend off external threats. The 11th century saw the arrival of the Seljuk Turks, a group that made their presence known with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. In 1055 C, they marched into Baghdad and declared themselves the protectors of the Caliphate. The Abbasid caliphs were relieved of their Buyid overlords, only to find themselves under new management. Imagine escaping a bear only to be caught by a lion, out of the frying pan, into the fire. And then there were the assassinations, because what's a historical decline without a few cloak and dagger plots? The Abbasid court was rife with intrigue, where loyalty was as fickle as a cat's affection. Caliphs were often assassinated for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or simply for being inconvenient to the wrong people. Al-Mudasim was poisoned in 842 CE, and Al-Mutawakkil met a grisly end in 861 CE, courtesy of disgruntled palace guards. It's safe to say that being caliph was not a job for the faint-hearted or the long-lived. Yet, amid all this chaos, the Abbasids left a legacy that outshone their political downfall. Their golden age was a beacon of cultural and technological innovation, a time when the Islamic world was at the forefront of scientific discovery. The House of Wisdom may have crumbled, but its intellectual fire burned on, influencing scholars across the globe. The Abbasids didn't just hoard knowledge, they shared it, translating and preserving texts that would later fuel Europe's Renaissance. Think of them as the original open-source community, sharing knowledge before Wikipedia made it cool. And let's not forget their contributions to technology. The Abbasids were pioneers in everything from algebra to astronomy. Their innovations in irrigation and agriculture transformed arid landscapes into lush fields, a legacy that continues to shape modern farming techniques. They laid the groundwork for the compass and astrolabe, tools that would guide explorers across uncharted seas. In a way, the Abbasids were the Silicon Valley of the medieval world, minus the hoodies and venture capital. But even as their empire crumbled, the Abbasids' cultural influence persisted, a testament to their enduring legacy. The art and architecture of the Islamic Golden Age continue to inspire, from the intricate mosaics of Spain's Alhambra to the soaring minarets of Istanbul's mosques. The Abbasids' love of learning seeped into the very fabric of society, creating a thirst for knowledge that transcended borders and time. So, where are they now? The Abbasid Caliphate may have faded, but its impact is woven into the tapestry of modern civilization. We see it in the algorithms that power our digital world, in the medical texts that laid the foundation for modern healthcare, and in the cultural exchanges that remind us of our shared humanity. The Abbasids taught us that knowledge knows no bounds, that curiosity is the catalyst for progress, and that even in decline, a legacy can shine brightly. As we close the book on the Abbasid Caliphate, let's remember that history is never a straight line. It's a complex web of triumphs and trials, of human ambition and folly. The Abbasids remind us that even in the darkest times, the light of knowledge can guide us forward. So here's to the Abbasids, the architects of a golden age, whose echoes still resonate in our world today. And as you drift off to sleep, let their story remind you that the past is never truly gone. It's just waiting to be rediscovered.